Good evening, everyone. With the time being 5:55 p.m. on Thursday, March 16th, 2023, I will call this meeting of the Webster School Committee to order and ask that we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to interview two superintendent finalists. The first person that we'll be interviewing is Mr. Stephen Lamarche. He'll be joining us momentarily. Good evening, Mr. Lamarche. Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. Sure. Just make sure it's on, if you would. Thank you.
Testing, test, yeah.
So once again, thank you for being here and for your interest in the superintendent position here in Webster. We've prepared 15 questions for you, and we plan to last about an hour. So, 3 or 4 minutes per question. And if we're running a little ahead of schedule, we'll have some time for Q&A from you as well at the end. Any questions before we get started?
Nope.
Perfect. Okay. Maybe you could begin by telling us why you chose to apply for the superintendent position here in Webster.
Great. One of the main reasons why I applied for this is because it was open. That was very exciting to me. I originally taught here in Webster, Massachusetts. It was really at a time when I was growing into my position as an educator within public schools. I was the social adjustment teacher at Anthony J. Sikowski School. It was a great position, great job. It was my third position ever in public education. My first year teaching was in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was quite an interesting experience. My nickname in St. Thomas was Milkman and Goat Cheese by my students, so that was quite a lesson in itself to try to understand what it was like to be judged on based on the color of your skin. So that was quite the experience, but I worked as a paraprofessional when I came back to the stateside, as they said, worked at Whittier Regional Vocational Technical High School, and then came here to Webster, Massachusetts. I had a great experience here in Webster. I have lifelong friends still here in Webster. And Webster in itself was, I was expressing interest in growing in leadership roles, and Webster was supporting me in growing in leadership roles. One of my first ever publicly speaking events was the speech contest at Anthony J. Sikowski School on the stage. And thank goodness the lighting was a little bit low because I'll be read tonight, but I was sweating profusely. We heard homework, oh homework, I hate you, you stink at least 15 times that night as a presentation. It was cute, but Webster was really trying to give me the opportunities and supporting me going towards leadership roles. So at one point in time, I was interviewed and hired as the assistant principal at Anthony J. Sikowski School. Now you find that to be unusual because there really was never an assistant principal at Anthony J. Sikowski School, and in fact that position ended within 2 months. And the position ended in 2 months because there were cost overruns within and non-compliance issues in the Department of Special Education and Student Services for Webster Public Schools. So I went back to the classroom, and that was a time when the director was changing, and they were looking for somebody to take over that role. And lo and behold, I was looking to elevate myself, and the district was looking to support me. So I became the interim director, or interim special ed administrator is what it was called, for that following year. And that was 1999 to Y2K, through Y2K. It was a great experience for me. Again, lifelong friends. Part of me wanted to get back to the building and grow through the building. I'm a strong believer in going through the steps and understanding leadership in order for me. I came from a family of an educator. My mother was what I call a high-power educator. She was one of the pioneers who started the Massachusetts Mathematics and Science Academy at WPI. And so through her mentoring, I believed that I needed to learn what an assistant principal did, principal, et cetera, district office level. Because I could have stayed as a director of special education. I'm confident of that, but I wanted to learn, and there was no opening for an assistant principal's position at that time. So that's when I moved on. From there, I've been connected to Webster ever still. My wife grew up in Webster, Massachusetts, and she and I got married at St. Louis. and her family has been connected to this community forever. Her mother lived in the Webster Manor for 27 years, so we were here frequently. Our oldest son, who's 17 now, was baptized at St. Louis. Our daughter, who's 13, was baptized at St. Louis, and we've just always been connected to the community with lifelong friends. So at some point in time, we were moving back to this area because my wife gave up a lot to move with me to support my career as an assistant principal. And so she gave up, for example, she was the assistant women's soccer coach at Holy Cross College. She gave that up to move so I could work in Bourne, Massachusetts, which is where I landed for a position. And at some point in time, we needed to come back. I also have an absolutely amazing, incredible, beautiful younger sister who has Down syndrome. And she lives semi-independent with her boyfriend in Worcester, Massachusetts. And during this time, we've lost our parents. And I am her caretaker, representative payee, caretaker, et cetera. And as our children were getting older and getting involved in weekends and athletics, getting to see my sister on the weekends to support her, even though she was living semi-independent, was becoming more difficult. So we had already been talking about trying to come back to this area. At the timing of that, coming back to this area was the year prior to COVID. This Webster was not an open position, so I applied for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District superintendency, and I was lucky enough to land that position. And I thoroughly enjoy my job as a superintendent there. And then this position became open, and it just felt so right in so many ways to apply for this position because not that Dudley Charlton is not the place for me to work. Webster feels like the real place for me to work, and I think I've said this in a couple of circles that Webster feels like home to me in many regard. As I expressed to my family, my brother sent me pictures of where we used to have family outings at Webster Lake, when we were little kids. So, I mean, I've been tied to this community. And probably the biggest tie that I have to this community is a very dear friend of mine was Van Constantine, very close friend. And I'm here to share this evening that my son's dream has been to get a tattoo on his arm, and he got it recently, and it's Van Constantine's name and the reading that I did at his funeral as well. So I don't know how else I can share with you why I want to apply for the Webster position. I feel like I can bring a piece of Van. I'll never be Van Constantine because to me he's at a different level than I am, but a piece of him to the work that I do. And I just think that Webster started my leadership role. I was able to go out and hone my skills as leadership through the ranks and come back and circle back. And I just think this is just an incredible opportunity for me to become the next superintendent for the Webster Public Schools, if so chosen.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarche.
And it's down to me. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Could you please describe the role of the superintendent as it relates to the development of district and school culture?
It's critical. One piece of it, first of all, is to understand the culture of the community. And I think that I have some understanding of it. Of course, it's changed since the year 2000. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But, there are certain pieces and elements to Webster and the Webster community that are still structurally in place for it. I think one of the things that has changed is from my perspective in trying to do as much as I can to prepare for this, is the finances for the school system. I was here in a time when the finances were extremely tight. Supply accounts at Anthony J. Sikowski School were $10,000 for the entire school. I may be exaggerating a little bit there, but finances are circling back for this community at this point in time. That's one element of it. But also demographics have changed. The increased number of low socioeconomic families has changed, and enrollment things have changed as well within this particular community. But as far as culture, first is to understand the culture. And I've given you already an example of trying to understand the culture teaching at St. Thomas. I had to try to understand the culture and my role in that culture. Another understanding of the culture is, and this has been shared, the first superintendent for Dudley Charlton Regional School District that made it past, from the outside, that made it past 1 year in that district. All other superintendents there have been within. So understanding the culture is a critical component of the superintendent in working on the climate and the culture of the district. The one piece that I will share with you is that as a superintendent, you own everything in the district. Culture is one of those things that you do own, but you own it in a collaboration. It's something you have to hone and develop together with other people to really understand how to move the culture forward or improve the culture, because it's kind of it's a two-way street. It's not just the superintendent doesn't just own it, but I set the stage for it. I facilitate the culture and the environment. And the examples I'll give you on setting the stage is I have to be willing to do the things that I'm asking other people to do, and there has to be a level of mutual respect, and there has to be a level of trust in all of that. So if somebody is expected to do a job, any job within the district, they're, as I've shared in the past, they're hard for everybody because we're publicly interfacing. I have to be willing to participate in any one of those positions and understand those roles in the district as well to hone that culture. Because culture, there are so many seeds to culture, there are so many factors in culture to help it grow and improve. That the superintendent really needs to be a willing participant in every part of it. But you need to lead. I need to be there. I need to be around. I need to be visible. I need to be trusted. I need to be cognizant of what's happening. I need to listen to what is going on in the culture, and really try to build that culture from where it is to the next phase. Everything we do is continuous improvement. So wherever the culture is today, it needs to move forward in the future. But the superintendent is critical to the role of culture because you are the leader of the school district. You're welcome.
I'm next.
Okay.
How would you implement culturally proficient curricula across all subgroups?
There's a couple of pieces to that question. One is it's actually prevalent in what you do when you start looking at new curriculum or high quality instructional materials. It's actually part of, if you look at the Curate website, it's actually part of their rubric on determining what is what curriculum should we be investing in as far as a district. So you want to have that as part of the evaluation system for implementing it or bringing in new high quality instructional materials, which is really critical to what we do. Another piece of that is it's under the TFM, Tiered Focus Monitoring Review. The district's required to have an annual review of their curriculum and look at and identify, it's called CR 25, Civil Rights 25, to identify the equitable access to your curriculum. And I think there's a misrepresentation sometimes of that. It doesn't mean that everything that is used or taught that is part of the instructional has to be one way. You can still implement things that have been traditional or things that have been used in the past, but you have to have a balance to it, and that's the evaluation part of it. But there's supposed to be an annual review of your curriculum and what's implemented and whether it does meet access of the constituents or the students that are in front of you. That could be something, some districts do something as simple as an end-of-the-year checklist, after the year, go through the curriculum, instructional materials that were used. The teacher could do that. It could be an ongoing basis when teachers, especially when you're rolling out new high-quality instructional materials, look at things that are the lessons that are coming forward. Are there questions within those, and start documenting that and have a review at the end of the year for that. But it has to be part of everything you do. It's number one. It's simple to say it's a requirement, but it's actually a practice, and it's a practice that you need to build into. You had your last TFM review 2 years ago, I think. You're up for another one, and that's the Part B, and that will have the Civil Rights 25 in there, which so I would want to understand what the tool is that's being used on an annual basis to evaluate culturally proficient or culturally responsive instructional materials.
Hello again.
Hi.
Mr. Lamarche, can you please describe 3 indicators that you'll utilize to determine the degree to which you're being successful in this role?
One would be feedback. One would be, I'm a strong believer in open door policy, taking phone calls, taking walk-ins. I've done it my entire administrative career. As a reminder, this is my 30th year in education, my 22nd year as some level of administrator in public education. And I've always prided myself on an open door policy, being available, access, answering emails. So that's one indicator. To me, I always, when I work with the school committee, people, in your role, people have no problems reaching out to you if they have a question or a concern. If they're doing that, and part of that question is concern is the superintendent didn't respond, I emailed the superintendent, I've tried for an appointment. If those are the things that you're getting for feedback, then I'm not being successful. I'm not doing the job that I expect to do as a superintendent. So that's one indicator for me. The other is building coalitions, collaboration opportunities with staff within the particular district. So for example, if you were working on a curriculum, have we been able to build a coalition of teachers that will be the voice of trying to move it forward? Am I doing a good job of facilitating that, organizing that, responding to that? So that leads to probably the third thing is there follow through in what I say and what I do. I think that that's probably one of the most critical pieces here as well. Because it's one thing to be able to talk the talk, is it also be able to walk the talk. I don't know if I said that right. I always get those wrong. But are you able to say this is what we're going to do and follow through? And it's not necessarily me, it's the district. Is the district following through? So the last one is follow through, but it's really a representation. Am I representing the district well, and is the district moving in the direction that the stakeholders want it to move into? And how that's measured, it will be up to you as a school committee and us collaborating, but that's really critical to me as well, to try to be a third indicator of success.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening.
Hello.
How have you built lines of communication with various district stakeholders, such as your leadership team, faculty, community leaders, and businesses?
Everything above, everything below, everything around. I've talked about this in other circles as well. Communication's a kind of a fickle thing. If people don't receive it in the way that they expect to get it, then they didn't get it. So you have to, especially being new, and this is when I talk about new staff coming into a district, I talk about communication is the biggest thing and the biggest part of your success moving forward, along with collaboration. But communication is critical, and I have to use every vehicle possible when I first start to hone in on what are the best communication systems for each entity that you're talking about. So for example, stakeholders, it could be that the town administrator would like me to stop in every Monday morning for a coffee just to kind of go over things. If that's the system that's going to work, then that's a system I'm going to buy into and we're going to do. For the chair of the school committee, working on an agenda or something like that, if Friday morning at 5 a.m. is the only time that the chair is available, I make that work. It just, that type of thing. So that's with stakeholders. Other forms of communication with, like, for example, parents. I believe strongly in trying to establish what is the best communication system for parents. And I've talked about structures, a lot of structures around that. And I talk about like codifying it. So for example, if a message comes out of the superintendent's office, then it's clear that this is coming from the superintendent's office. And the example I'll give you is obviously through COVID, we did tons of communication. So all of my communications had DCRSD update and the date on it, and people got used to that was the communication coming from Superintendent Stephen Lamarche. As far as a principal would codify theirs, and so they'd have a system for communication for that. So I'm talking about the general communication to stakeholders, families, communities, that nature. As far as leadership team, meeting on a regular basis, being in their offices on a regular basis. I'm a strong believer in not always having a set meeting. It's good to have a set meeting, especially if you're not meeting, but I'm also one who's like an impromptu. So coming in, after a school committee meeting, I love to debrief with the central office administrators and say, okay, what did we learn from the school committee meeting? What are the steps? What are the strategies we need to look at? Is this on course? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to change? So I always have that. Same thing with principals and administrators is meet at least twice a month formally as a group, but also meet with them individually on my own. And really, the superintendent's office isn't always the office of ideas, it's the office of concerns. It's the office of things that are coming up or bubbling up that need to be addressed. And so it's not always a position I want to sit in and wait for that to come, so I always go out. So one of the things I do is go meet with the building principals, say, how's it going, what's going on? I also like to meet with principals to go over staffing, how staffing go, how the new teacher's going, all kinds of communication around that aspect. But my role as a superintendent is really, has become, and I accept this, is like a 24/7 cycle of communication. I answer emails up until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. A lot of educators do that now, but that's really my role as a superintendent. The only times that I don't do that is when I just inform everybody I'm going to be on a family vacation. But otherwise, I'm available all weekend long for school committee, for principals, for my accessibility is 24. I call it 24/7. There are hours that I do sleep, but I do try to make myself available. And one of the things that I really get my principals to work on for communication is, even if you don't have the answer right then and there, at least reply and say, I've received your email, I'm acknowledging receipt of it, I'll get back to you by this time tomorrow, something of that nature. And I'm a strong believer in responding to people within 24, on the long end, 48 hours, but within 24 hours. You're welcome.
Back to me. I have a two-part question, so I'm just going to ask you first part first. How would you foster meaningful, productive, and supportive relationships between staff, families, and students?
I've talked about this in a couple of times. I really appreciated my site visit here because I met with a lot of people in my site visit, and we had lots of conversation. In your district plan, you have that everyone's going to reach out for a phone call in the beginning in there as well. So you already had something in there. I was asking questions about what's next and that type of thing. That fostering that engagement is really looking at how our students are experiencing school. that's the best vehicle for students, especially at the elementary level. If they go home and say that I had a great experience, I love school, can't wait to go back tomorrow, we are fostering communication between school and home right then and there. You've set the baseline for excellent communication. And then when you get into things like parent communication or parent access, I really, the one phone call to start the year is great, but I also believe in other forms of communication, because when you get to examples like parent-teacher conferences, that's an event. That shouldn't be the place that you establish those open lines of communication. They should have already been established. In the event that they're not, the parent-teacher conference could be a vehicle, and part of that agenda should be, how can we communicate and make sure that we're on the same page? Because similar to what I said about communication earlier, parents don't always receive communications the same way. So how we foster that communication loop has to start earlier in the year, so you don't wait for that particular event. And then really, teachers have their communication strategies as well. We have to try to work on that as much as we can establish a framework for it. But if my way of doing it is using Dojo or some other system to do it, or my way is to set up a Google Sheet so I can list the assignments that are coming out for my students, and that's my form of communication, as long as we're communicating, that's how we're going to communicate, that's a positive. So you have to foster all of those communications. But I'm a strong believer that education starts and finishes at home. We're in the middle. So we have to foster that communication between families and home in every way we possibly can.
Thank you. So to follow up on that, what are the supports that you will develop and implement to make families an equal and informed partner with staff?
Well, I already talked about access. Access is critical to me. The schools need to be accessible to the community, to parents, whether there's events. Any way you can get parents into a school is a positive for me. They're their schools, they're their community schools, they're a reflection of their children. So if it's a math night or some other event, it's a great way to have students and families engaged in the school and open up those lines of communication. I think one of the things coming out of COVID that's been very difficult is public educators have been very tired and exhausted from that experience. And I think this year has not been a complete relief for them. This year has been getting back to systems and trying things of that nature. So trying to build all of those in this year has probably not been the most productive, but that is a time to do that. But another way to engage that is what I would call vertical opportunities. So for example, elementary students see high school students as rock stars. So if you did like a reading night and you had high school students, the football team, basketball team, go to Park Ave and read to the students, have a reading night, something of that nature, I guarantee you'll have people draw in, because not only are the older kids going in and they're the rock stars, but the parents of the younger kids, and some people may be related or connected in some way. So some of that vertical opportunity. Or another example I'll give you the opposite way is when we do Future Teachers of America, we've had some high school students who have done some internships with young students, and they participate in extracurricular activities at the high school level, and they actually invited their classes that they were interning to their high school basketball game. And so having that vertical thing is another way to engage families and engage people within the particular schools. But really getting to the bottom of that is going to take collaboration and work with everybody to understand what's going to work best for Webster moving forward at this point in time. You're welcome. I feel like I'm going fast, sorry.
It's all right.
I do tend to talk fast sometimes.
What concrete steps would you take to bring us out of turnaround status? And how will you measure and report on the progress to stakeholders?
It's a great question, and my goal here is not to offend anybody. But I've heard turnaround a lot in my interview, but I can't find anything on your website that talks about turnaround. You're in turnaround, I get that, but so my first step would be to make sure that it's well advertised on your website, what turnaround means, why you're in turnaround. The only thing that I can find for turnaround is because of you were in the lowest 10% of performance, but I can't find anything. And I'm Joe Public, I'm not on the inside to really understand it, but to really understand why you're in turnaround and what turnaround means and develop a turnaround plan. So when I did meet with staff, that was one of the questions that I asked all the staff, what does turnaround mean to you? And I got very, very not on the same page type of responses. And again, I'm not blaming anybody for that, but my first strategy would be to really develop and hone out what turnaround means for Webster Public Schools. What is the plan, and what are the concrete steps? What are the steps we're going to take to move out of turnaround? So one, if I could really understand exactly why you're in turnaround, to me it's achievement on MCAS testing. Because if you look at your student growth on MCAS testing, you were ranked 125 out of the 288 districts. So it wasn't a growth thing, it was an achievement thing. So that's the best I can do to focus on right now. So I look at achievement and where achievement is on this. Because when I look at your MCAS scores post-COVID, there was some movement up in your MCAS scores. So to understand exactly what turnaround means and why we're using the term turnaround, I understand turnaround. I understand the framework for turnaround, that, you know, you need sustained leadership, you need human capital, trust, you need, you know, all the things that are in turnaround, that are critical, high quality instructional materials, which you've been working on as a district, PBIS, some distributive leadership. You've been working on all those things, but I couldn't go to your website and I couldn't go to DESI's site to say this is what turnaround means for Webster Public Schools. And so that would be the number one thing that I would work on. The other would be to really look at all of your structures in place to address turnaround and what that looks like. Because you as a district have added a lot of things to your district, so it would be to determine, are they effective things? I mean, turnaround is a short window. It's not, you know, that sometimes change can take a lot of years. Turnaround to me means it has to happen now. So I'd want to evaluate the return on investment on some of the investments that you're making right now and see if they're impacting exactly the reason why you're in turnaround. So I would quickly evaluate that as well to understand what that looks like, because there are new systems being in play. And again, with the financial support from the state and from your community, the town, you even have additional money to look at and how you're going to apply that to the district. So that would be, how is that going to apply in the current systems that are currently in place? So for me, turnaround, the first step would clearly be, what does turnaround mean to the entire community? Can we all be on the same page and have the same understanding of that? And can we advertise to the world as to why we're in turnaround and what turnaround means? And then establish a plan that is incremental, thoughtful, but methodical, and takes concrete steps one at a time from that point forward. And really, and obviously report to school committee. I think it should be an ongoing agenda item. It would be an administrative agenda item. Every administrative meeting, it would be on the agenda for that as well. But the turnaround plan would be established to say, these are the steps we're taking, how are we progressing, progress monitoring it. Those are all critical. Again, the framework, I think we all understand, but how we apply that to Webster Public Schools is, I don't have a clear understanding yet, and I would need to develop that in short order. I hope that helps. Again, I wasn't trying to offend anybody with that response.
Thank you. How would you ensure the district is providing adequate instruction, support, and intervention to our students and members of subgroups who fail to meet the learning standards?
So, again, I'm only going off of what I know so far. So again, I'm not trying to, and you're probably already learning that I can be frank. It's just my nature. I just, you know, want to be honest with individuals. Mrs. Siddiqui, and am I saying that correctly? You did a great job at one of the meetings asking about if students with tier 1 instruction, if they're not understanding it, what happens? Because we're trying to elevate them up a couple of grades. And I didn't, and this is not a fault of the staff here because it's a level of understanding, I didn't get a sense of the response that I really had a healthy understanding as to what we were talking about. And to me, that's tier 2. And tier 2 is anything from within the classroom, outside of the classroom. So to ensure that they're meeting that, because you are rolling out high quality instructional materials, which is absolutely the right thing to do, but only 85% of your students, any student in a classroom, is only going to understand the tier 1 curriculum taught the tier 1 way the first time around. So we have to start evolving tier 2, and that could be anyone in the student. It doesn't have to be a student with special needs. It doesn't have to be a student with a disability. It could be any student in that particular classroom. We have to evolve tier 2 from there, and so we should be working as a district on building the capacity of teachers around tier 2. Because tier 2 starts in the gen ed classroom, whether it's to have a group that you bring into the classroom and reteach in a certain way or a certain methodology, all the way up to provide Title I services for a particular student, but it should be fluid in some way to make sure they're accessing, because their access points will be different. Their knowledge and their experience from their years will be different within a particular curriculum area that you're talking about. So to ensure it, we really need to develop an understanding of tier 2. Tier 3, I think, is pretty clean for people. I think they understand that. That tends to get into students with disabilities, IEPs. That's more individualized. Tier 2 is really looking at groups, targeted groups, needs-based groups, and that could be any student within that particular environment, and it should be fluid for students to fluctuate between tier 1 and tier 2. And if we're really sound on our tools for tier 2 and our instructional strategies around tier 2, then we are really doing a much better job of capturing all students to access the curriculum, which is a tier 1, which is the absolute goal. Welcome.
What is the role and value of assessment instruments in today's schools?
Critical. Critical. Now, I've come a long way. MCAS test to me, I was anti-MCAS, still have a flavor of that in my body. I don't seem to get rid of that. But you know, MCAS really does provide you something as long as you're doing other assessments within your district. And I think it took a long time for school districts to catch on to that from a systematic approach. So for example, as a district, you're doing iReady, that's great. You're starting to roll that out. I saw the school committee meeting where you presented some of the data. There was some nice pieces in there. That to me has to already move to the next step. You know, which students actually moved, which students didn't move within there. You know, it's great that you're saying a certain number moved this way, a certain number moved that way. But, you know, I think we need to evolve that data to show which students actually moved and which students didn't. Did any students move down while some students moved up to change some of those numbers within that particular iReady assessment? We would get to that if I'm the successful candidate, but I think benchmarking, progress monitoring, that level of assessment, screening tools for students, for groups of students. So for example, if you're using the DIBELS and you have a number of students that score a certain level in DIBELS, there should be some other screening tool that you already apply to see where students may be. So it's multiple levels of assessment, and then the MCAS test is a great way to determine whether we have growth or we're not. I mean, we are required to do it, but it's a great way to measure that. It does provide you with enough information as long as you're doing some of your own assessment. Now, when I talk about assessments specifically, especially all in mass or grade level, it really needs to be a plan and a schedule for that. It's not something that we just say, Monday we're going to do iReady or Tuesday we're going to do iReady. There really needs to be a plan for the benchmarking portion of that and the evaluation of that. And then the other part of assessment that is still not completely ironed out yet, and I would need to understand the structures here in Webster Public Schools, is how to provide access to teachers without having it be overwhelming. So to me, that means the data needs to be a couple keystrokes away for a student. So you're using PowerSchool here. PowerSchool, you can amend the software in such a way that you can put the data within PowerSchool. So if a teacher wanted to look up a particular student's performance in a certain area that we're assessing on, benchmarking, progress monitoring, assessing, we could actually see that in PowerSchool because you can adapt a screen or a window in PowerSchool to do that. But providing it to teachers in an easy, accessible way has to be the way to do it. Just doing assessment and having it in a room or a closet or in someone's office is not, I completely disagree with that. But having it as far as progress monitoring tools, adjusting teaching, tier 2, getting it to tier 2 instruction, that's critical to our success and the growth of our students.
Back to me.
Oh.
Mr. Lamarche, can you describe your ability to cultivate a disciplined, safe school environment?
That's really been critical. That's, without question, the number one priority for any of us, is if students and staff don't feel safe coming into work every day, then we're already failing everybody. How do you expect students to really excel, meet expectations, if we're thinking about safety on a regular basis? So the way I would break that down is there's two avenues to that. There's external safety that needs to be looked at on a regular basis, and then there's internal safety that needs to be looked at. So I'll cover the external because that's the one that most everybody knows, and that's, you know, active shooter, things of that nature. But that's something you have to continue to work on. So for example, it's a requirement in the districts that I've been superintendent that every month the faculty meeting dedicates some time to the external causes for exercising emergency strategies. Whether it's an odor in the building, whether it's an active shooter, every month there has to be a review of one or two of the I mean, you start every year with that way, but you have to, on a monthly basis, review that. In Dudley Charlton, we just received a grant. We're bringing in the Ed Davis Group to come in and work with us for a roundtable. Because one of the things that I think also gets lost in that is if we have an active shooter, what's relocation look like? We don't really practice relocation. I'm not sure any district that does that. So we're bringing in the Ed Davis Group to work with us internally as an administrative team to look at what relocation looks like within our district and tying into other community resources. We're going to do that internally. That's one step in the training that we're going to do. And then the next step is we're inviting all of our first responders from our two communities as well as Nichols College to come in and do a roundtable and talk about, you know, how do we all work together, because Nichols College is a second site for us, those things of that nature too, and how would we stage everything. It's something you can talk about and put on paper, but until you bring in all the players to it, you really won't understand it that well. And, you know, maybe in the future there could be a drill for that, but drills sometimes unnerve some people. So that's the external stuff that you have to continue to work on. And as I said, it's a monthly thing. Now, the internal thing is safety within the particular school. So, from what I've read, a couple of things that you're working on here in Webster that are very impressive and appropriate is like PBIS, positive behavior. I call it intervention strategies, but it's intervention something else. We live in, as you know, we live in a world of acronyms, so I sometimes create my own words with the acronyms. But you have to, that's one positive thing. But one of the things that was critical for me as a building principal was establishing what I called non-negotiables, norms of behavior. And it's something I've worked on with staff, and I've also worked on with students as a principal, and then as superintendent with schools that have struggled with certain behaviors within their particular environment. And what you're doing, I'm a behaviorist. My background was in behavior. I worked at the Greenery in Worcester. The Greenery is a facility for head injury and brain injury adults. I did that per diem for 4 years while I was working here in Webster. And we were attempting to change behavior in a positive way 5 minutes at a time. So I'm really a behaviorist. So looking at non-negotiable norms of behavior, what can we identify as norms? And when I talk about norms of behavior, they're really established by the people in the environment. Trust me, kids want norms too. They want to live in a place that has expectations and norms to behavior. They want to be in a safe environment as well as the staff. So you work on a couple of layers and you establish, let's say, maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 norms that we're going to work with and live with to really try to establish how we expect people to act within our particular school. And you try to present them in a positive way. Prevent is a word, ensure is a word, respect is a word. You try to start the sentence that way. But so for example, we will prevent all use of foul language within our school. We're all gonna do it, it's all. I've always been a strong believer that rules only hurt honest people. So how do we get to a point where we establish rules that really affect and impact everybody? We set up norms of behavior that we can all invest in and agree to. We will prevent all forms of defamation, all forms of destruction and defacing of school property. So as a principal, I was a principal for 4 years. We hung these posters on our walls, and they were paper posters, and nobody touched them for 5 years. And they still had the norms of behavior on them. So you as a culture, as a building, you have to establish this is what we're going to all agree to, because the other thing at schools is rules are only as good as the people who enforce them. So if you're only relying on the principal to enforce it, it's gonna fail. The principal can't be everywhere and can't be the enforcer. So it has to be something that we all agree, this is the norms, these are the norms we're going to set, and then from year to year, you can adjust those norms. So now that we've been able to, because behavior is something that happens in frequencies. So, and that's safety and behavior are in frequency. So if I don't feel safe because of these certain actions or behaviors that are happening in our school, we have to decrease the amount of frequency in which it happens. We're not in the extinguish business, because kids are kids. We can't always just say, okay, from this point forward, you're done. You're not gonna do that anymore. We have to ease our way and work our way into it's teaching and learning and work our way through that. But these are what we all collectively accept as norms of behavior to create a safe learning environment for you and for the staff and for everybody in this building. So yes, establishing the culture of norms of behavior, norms of expectation around safety. I've had lots of experience and I've worked with schools, and some principals are able to do it with their staff. Some principals need support with their staff, but it is something that's critical. And to me, it's amazing what the teaching and learning looks like after you've established that, because you're not focused on it. I call it like the gum chewing effect. You could have, say, the rule is no gum chewing in our school, then you're spending at least 20 minutes a day talking about gum. The students who bring in gum, wear gum, have gum. To me, it was, yes, I'll support a classroom teacher who allows gum chewing in there as long as the gum is disposed of appropriately and correctly. That way, we're not all talking about gum, for 20 minutes to take away from teaching and learning, because it's just, that's sacrosanct to me. The time in the classroom is incredible. That's the center of our universe. You're welcome.
How would you use student performance data to prioritize use of resources, including money, technology, resources, and human capital?
I don't know how you wouldn't. I don't know what's the alternative. I don't know what the alternative is. Student performance and how our students are performing in certain core instruction or other instructional areas, and what the outcome is like should be our investment. If our investment is not going in the direction that we as a community, you as a school committee, myself as a superintendent, the teachers, staff, parents don't believe it's going in, that's where our investment needs to be. But we need to be able to identify, and that's what we talked about with assessment and stuff, where are we with that? So, and you need to be able to say, no. You need to be able to say, you know what, this particular thing isn't working, so we need to move on to something else. We need to evolve that or move on onto it. The example I've given is that I'm a strong proponent of technology in schools. I was the director of technology for the Bourne Public Schools as the superintendent. We tried rolling out handheld smartphones as a device. There were a couple teachers who wanted to model that and pilot that. Then we went to tablets, and then it got to a point where we couldn't sustain it, nor the teachers' feedback wasn't enough to say, this is actually working for us. We got Verizon to install the antennas, the whole thing, but it got to a point where we had to say no. It would have been easy to say, for political reasons or public reasons, yes, we're going to continue and give kids tablets and stuff like that, but it wasn't effective in the models of instruction that we had at that particular time. So you have to be able to, so that's a change in investment to say, what are we going to invest in? And we invested more in Chromebooks, accessible Chrome carts, things of that nature, so that all kids could have access to it, because it was a much more attainable and productive access for our students within that particular school. But you have to be in a position to say, you know, you're rolling out HQIM, high quality instructional materials in literacy or literacy reset right now. My hope is that you're implementing that with fidelity, but it gets to a point where what are we missing because you're evaluating it on a regular basis. So what do we need to invest in to support HQIM and other students? I feel it's always tier 2 that you need to do more investment in, but what else are you going to invest in? And that's based off of student performance and how they are performing. So with your HQIM over 1 or 2 years, even though you're in turnaround, it's kind of sped up a little bit, you need to look at what's the outcome coming from that HQIM implementation and rollout. If it's not if you're not getting the gains that you want to get or you think you should be getting as educators, teachers in the classroom, as school committee representatives, then we need to make a shift. We need to make a change and change the resources. EL is another example. We're all in a position now where we're receiving EL students. Sometimes they haven't spoken any English or haven't even had education. We need to reinvest in EL at this point in time. I don't know where it is exactly here in our district, in Webster Public Schools, but that needs to be something that needs to look at, because what are those students' performances? And Webster was one of the first districts when I was here where there was really a hard line being drawn by DESE about the number of students that were EL that were qualifying for special education. And that's a hard line now between DESE, because students who are EL shouldn't just automatically qualify for special education just because they are unable to access the curriculum because of being EL. So that's another example of performance-based. How are those students performing and what investment does that need to look like? But I wouldn't know, sorry. I wouldn't know what the alternative is of what you asked, okay?
Describe your philosophy surrounding the evaluation of direct reports and how you would mentor, guide, and support underperforming staff and inspire others to perform at a higher than current level.
Well, I don't know if it's come across, but I'm very passionate about public education, very passionate about my career. That's kind of a simple starting point, but that's a starting point for me. I look for passion. I'm an EI person, emotional intelligence. I really honestly think, I haven't done a complete study, I haven't done my dissertation on it, but COVID crushed emotional intelligence, absolutely crushed it. And that's such a huge component to the success of our students as well as our staff. You know, their emotional well-being, but able to exercise their socialization, their emotional status and understanding and their emotional intelligence in some way. So I'm a strong believer in that. When it comes to motivating, again, our position is to motivate. We don't have it's not from a negative perspective. It's from a, what can we do to be better? What can we do? I can be better. I can be better tomorrow. I already know that. I don't come in here being an expert on everything. I need to learn things on a regular basis, and that's what my expectation is around people that I'm evaluating or mentoring, as well as what can we learn and how can I support you to learn that or to understand that. Now, I have lots of knowledge from 30 years and 22 years as administration to be able to apply that, but my application isn't a dictation. It isn't, this is what you're going to do. It's how do we learn? I try to have people learn. Sometimes I get accused of like testing people, just tell me. That's not the goal here. The goal is to say so that we can all learn that particular piece of it. Now, one thing that's real critical to me on directs or people that I evaluate is I'm a strong believer in no surprises. It is an ongoing dialogue. If you don't know where you stand with me, then I truly have failed miserably, because I have open dialogue, ongoing dialogue. This is what you're working on. This is what my concern is. Every year I do a informal mid-year review with all principals to review where I think where they are, some things that, maybe communication, or there was an incident that I think maybe could have been handled differently. I have that informally because I don't want that to become a gotcha evaluation. But we've walked through a lot of those things, and I just want to remind them because reflection is such a huge key to anything we do. And so applying that reflection point for principals is critical to their mentoring and to their growth. But with other people that I work with, again, you're going to know where you stand with me because I tend to be frank. I'm a people person, in this. Funny to say that because sometimes people tag me as being tall and quiet, but I was the shyest kid in the world growing up. Trust me. As I shared with the speech contest, I couldn't. The lights were low, and I was those administrators that always liked the PowerPoint, and the lights dimmed a little bit when I did my public presentations because I had to grow into being a public presenter. It wasn't something that still comes easy for me. But with people, as far as people business, I engage with you every day. Good morning. Let's talk. Do you have a minute? I like office meetings. And again, it's not. Maybe to start, it would be something that's scheduled, but it's more impromptu. Hey, this is coming up. I got a question for you. It has to be engagement all the way along, so for people to understand where they're at. As far as mentoring principals, I take pride in that, and that's why I told you as a group that I liked going through the steps, being an assistant principal, then a principal, and I had unique opportunities in both of those roles because as an assistant principal in Bourne, we opened up a brand new middle school and combined 3 faculties into 1 building. They were in 3 different facilities, so they had all 3 different cultures, and we had to bring them all together to establish one culture. So that was an incredible experience. And then in Pembroke, I was the first principal in 50 years within that particular community that was a middle school principal. They separated from Silver Lake Regional Schools and started their own community-based schools, so I had to establish the culture within that particular school. So I've had unique experiences on all of those things in mentoring that I've had lifelong mentoring friendships. Let me say, some of the people that I've mentored in school administration have now become superintendents, directors of special education, director of business services. On my school council, I like mentoring school council members. I always found that to me was a gateway to school committee. So I was very proud as a principal that I had 3 members of my school council eventually become members of school committee because I thought that was, if we set up school council in a way that, helped grow people into school committee, I thought that was extremely important. So growing the business, not being the smartest guy in the room, being able to share, collaborate, consult, those are all critical components to me. But knowing where you stand with me is to me is everything around evaluation. The paper is one thing, but knowing where you stand, because unknowns, the trepidations of again, not knowing something, that's the worst thing you can do to anybody in our business. You're welcome.
Back to me. How would you address the turnover at the building administrator level?
Sustained leadership is huge. It's critical. It's critical. You talk about turnaround. That's one of the main frameworks for that. But it's also, whether you turn around or not, it's critical to your system because you're talking about building institutional knowledge. This is how we handle this. This is how we address this. And so to me, it's building that team concept right away. We are part of a team. This is our work together. And really trying to get the best out of the principals that you can. Have there been times in my 22 years, my 13th year now as superintendent, that principals have not stayed or have gone? Absolutely, but the core has to be developed right away. This is what we're responsible. This is, in the beginning part of that is building your belief system. So your belief system's the same. Are you here for all kids? Is that number 1 on your list? It is on mine. Building that core as to who you are and why you're here, and how can we make this sustainable for you and sustainable for us as a district without sacrificing things. The sacrifice should be for kids, meaning I'm going to give you everything I got for the students. It shouldn't be that we're going to give you a $2 million contract just to keep you here. That's not appropriate. But building the core of belief systems, core of knowledge, core of understanding, core of systems. I'm a process person. This is how we address this. My admin meetings always start with a case study. This is what's going on in this particular school. How would you handle it? We try to build that understanding together so that we're always on the same page. I shared with a couple of people that for Christmas this year, all of the principals in Dudley Charlton received a clock, and the clock has 2 sevens on it. 1 7 is where the 9 would be, and 1 7 is where the 3 would be. And and I asked the principals, it's not evaluative, but I asked them to put it in their office and take a picture of it and send it to me. But it was really a key to say, at least twice a day, think of each other, because there are 7 schools in Dudley Charlton. So at 9:15 or 3:45, you have to look at, you have other colleagues within your district. Because I think one of the things that people miss in the roles of mentoring principals is the superintendent is really the owner of the big picture in trying to build the vision, where the principals are asked to really manage their building from the front door to the back door. So we have to bounce each other back and forth on each other. Principals, I appreciate pushback from principals to say, no, this is what I need for my school. And then I'm the one who gets to be able to say, okay, let's look at the big picture, myself and other district administrators. But there needs to be open dialogue and free reign to be able to say those things and talk about those things. So building that core of principals and leadership to stay within the district, because it's not just principals, it's also district office administrators, it's special education leaders. Building that is to job satisfaction. They have a voice, they're part of the team, they can communicate, we have aligned belief systems. Those are all critical components to sustain that leadership, which I know, through all my years of working and talking with my friend Van, there has been a lot of changes in leadership within Webster Public Schools, and sustaining that is really critical to all the good things that are going on here in Webster right now. Again, I tend to talk fast, so follow-up questions are welcome.
Who are you accountable to, and how will you hold yourself and others accountable for follow-through and outcomes?
I'm accountable to everybody. Let's start with students, but I'm accountable to everybody. The student experience is probably the most thing that I'm accountable for. If students are not having a good experience here, I've always prided myself as a building principal, as a district administrator. I want students to feel comfortable coming to school and going home from school. So I'm accountable to them. If a student is having a tough experience and they're not finding a vehicle to be able to express that they're having a tough experience, then I'm accountable for that. I need to make sure that those lines of opportunity and communication are accessible for students. But I'm accountable to everybody. I'm accountable to you as a school committee. Again, that goes beyond the fact that I work for you and you're the evaluators of me. It means that I need to answer to all of your questions and concerns that you raise to me. I'm accountable to all the staff. The staff is critical. They are, I talked about the classroom is sacrosanct. The classroom is the center of the universe. And it is my job to make sure that whatever I do in my role doesn't impact that belief system. So for example, initiative after initiative after initiative after initiative, if that's my motivation here because I just connected to the word turnaround, I'm failing, I'm not accountable to the teachers at that point in time. I've lost my accountability to them. I'm accountable to the community. I have to be somebody who's fiscally conservative. Because we're talking about tax dollars and public money here. So I have to make sure that I know and understand where the finances are and what's being spent where. I need to have a clear understanding of that because I need to be able to answer that question as well. So I'm accountable to the community, but I'm accountable to the town hall as well. And accountability to town hall is building an effective relationship to work together as one community. That is how I am accountable to the town hall. But I'm accountable to everybody and anybody. And the last part of your question again, sorry?
How would you hold others accountable for follow-through and outcomes?
Well, when I met with Principal Collins, he said it a little bit different than I've learned it, but if it's worth expecting, it's worth inspecting. I mean, that's kind of how I was raised in this business. So holding other people accountable is making sure that the expectations are known and clear, that they're not nebulous, they're not vague, they're not a gray area that somebody could say, well, wait a minute, you never told me that. So having those very clear, those expectations clear, and then making sure people are held accountable to that. Held accountable isn't a gotcha model. Held accountable means, how do we get to that? How do we work together to get to our goal here and what our expectation is here? So that accountability has pieces to it. It's not a black and white event, and it's not a one-time event.
Mr. Lamarche, we're nearing the end of our time here together. Just in closing, is there anything that you were hoping to have the chance to talk about this evening that we haven't gotten to yet?
I brought this up at the other interview, and I know. Do you mind if I call you Nick? Is that okay? Okay. I know you had talked about well, first of all, again, I'm honest to a fault, so I apologize for that. This was probably one of the more difficult preparations for me because I've never had a school committee try to prepare themes of questions before. I've always come into a meeting cold. So in my mind, these are just only two of me trying to put all my pieces together. So it was more difficult. But part of the conversation was about the school project, which I completely agree. The hard part of the community support and all of that was definitely accomplished. But there's a lot of work going forward for the school and for the superintendent. And specifically, I want to get into the part about communication, which I didn't mention then because I was hoping for an opportunity to talk about it as well. But you're going through a renovation project, so communication is going to be critical. And it's not just this is what's happening, it's this is what our life is like. Because the students, no matter what, the students who are going through that renovation project, it is still the most special time of their life. And so we have to really fold out and invest a lot of time to say, and I'm not being critical of you, but we have to invest a lot of time to say, this is what my experience is like, and this is why I'm happy, and this is why I like going to Bartlett High School through the renovation project. You know, this is what our hallways look like, this is what our classrooms look like, this is the event we're going to have. There's a lot of work around that, and then, you know, never mind the other stuff about the building committee, and I noticed the superintendent isn't a voting member on the building committee. I was surprised by that, but that's okay. Because the superintendent can be a voting member on the school building committee. Another question, are there teachers on the school building committee?
There are not teachers. We have administrators.
Okay.
Trying to think. So many of us. There are staff. Yeah, there are staff.
There are staff? Okay.
There are, yes. I take
All right.
that back. There are staff.
It wasn't easy for me to pull out of the list that there were teachers on there, so. yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Our AD is on there. We have a custodian on there as well.
So one of the biggest pieces moving forward is going to be around all that communication as to what's going on. And then the dreaded thing of making sure that there aren't a lot of change orders through a renovation project as well is somebody's going to have to hold the thumb to that process. So there's still a lot of work to do with that project. I'm not trying to be critical of that and why that wasn't a question here tonight. I completely understand it because there's so much else going around, especially around turnaround, culture in the district, sustained leadership. I get all of that. But there's still a lot of work in that, but we really have to bring the life of the school forward for those students that are still going through a renovation project, which is not always easy because they will see it as a negative, why me, why is this occurring while I'm attending Bartlett High School or graduating this year. Just think of how students, when they came out of COVID, how they were feeling through that as well. Some of those same feelings will occur through a renovation project that lasts 3 years. So to me, that's one item that I want to bring up that I think is critical to the next superintendent here as well, to have a keen eye on that.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarche.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions you may have for us?
I really see this as an incredible opportunity for me. As I've shared in a couple of groups, I'm humbled by even the opportunity here. I never thought that this position was going to become available. This is nothing against Dudley Charlton. I have a great job. I'm under contract in Dudley Charlton. There's a lot of work going on in Dudley Charlton that I really respect and appreciate and will remain part of if I am not the successful candidate here. But this is an incredible opportunity for me and honestly for my family. And for the friendships that I've had here. You know, one of the questions that comes up is, you know, coming back to a district, because I did work here at some point in time and I do know people here, and I appreciated that question in one of my meetings. And I learned a long time ago, I actually learned it here, kind of how that worked and what that looked like. For those of you who may or may not have known Milt Tegas, he was somebody who came back to the district at one point in time, and it really didn't end up being successful, but that's when I was working in the district office, and I learned a lot from that. And so I've had experience, so I changed my approach based off of his approach when I left Bourne as an assistant principal and came back as the superintendent, and I really expressed, you know, who I am to a core. You know, the person who loves to laugh, the person who enjoys students and children, the person who likes to work with people. That hasn't changed, just my role has changed, and we need to have an understanding as to what that looks like. So that came up as a question. I just wanted to share that as well, that I do have an understanding of what that might look like, but I just think this is an incredible opportunity, and I really hope I'm the successful candidate.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time and for your continued interest. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all. Thank
Have
you.
a good
Thank you.
night.
Yep.
Good evening.
Evening.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be back.
It's nice to see you again. So just to start things off, we've prepared about 15 questions for you, and we have an hour. So similar to the last time, we're going to try to keep good time, and we're going to sort of just go around the room here. So just to kick things off, maybe if you could, can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to apply for the superintendent position here in Webster?
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to be here and was very enthusiastic about applying for the superintendent position here in Webster because Webster is already engaged in some turnaround work, which is really exciting and fulfilling work that I've been engaged in my current district. And I really find that work fulfilling because it's really about making sure every student, every child gets what they need when they need it. And that's a really key piece, and that's why I got into education. So that work's really exciting to me. Another thing that was really lovely when I was looking at Webster and applying is the fact that central office is right here on campus with our students. And you're right there in it and have the ability to be active in the schools. So that was really important to me in this work. I'm really excited to be here and excited about the idea of working with your students, kind of working on their achievement work, digging into data with staff. And I think what was really wonderful when I did the site visit was hearing from the teachers about what they're most proud of in Webster. And all of them said, our kids. And that's exactly where we want to be. That's so wonderful to be jumping in at that point. So that's what brought me here in the first place. And that's why I'm really excited to continue this process.
Perfect, thank you.
I'm going to start us off. Could you please describe the role of the superintendent as it relates to the development of district and school culture?
Sure. So as the instructional leader for the district and the overall leader for the district, it's really important that the superintendent spends a lot of time and effort understanding where stakeholders are at, what's going on, and then building up that sense of community through a clear vision, a clear strategic plan, and then going through that work with the leadership team together and with our staff all together. So it's important that that the instructional leader is really building that collective efficacy, that sense of we are all in this together, we move forward in the work together. And that means finding out what people's needs are. Do they need support in certain areas? And making sure that we get those resources and that support for our staff and for our leaders. It's really important to build that sense of community up in a way that people want to stay and continue to do the work in Webster with our students. That's all really a critical piece. So as the leader of the district, it's important to build trust, open up communication, bring people together, get a sense of a clear vision, and then move that vision forward in a tangible way.
How would you implement culturally proficient curricula across all subgroups?
Sure. So given that the question asks about subgroups, I think it's really important to visit that first and say that all students should have access to grade level, rigorous instruction. The materials should be culturally responsive, culturally relevant, and worthy of our students. The tasks in front of them should be worthy of their attention and their engagement. And I think it's really important that we look at our systems and make sure that our students in subgroups are getting equal access to that rigorous instruction. Make sure that that every student is getting the supplemental supports they might need to succeed, but that's not supplanting their access to grade level rigorous instruction. So we need to look at, does the schedule appropriately allow students to access additional support when needed while still getting that on grade level instruction that they need. And we know, especially with the more recent science of reading research that's come out, how important it is for students to be interacting with really high-level text and hearing vocabulary and being immersed in conversation and discussion that's on level and rigorous. So we need to make sure our students are there and in class getting that grade level instruction and then getting the additional support time that they need to fill gaps that we know are there, that we can't necessarily do anything about, or can't do anything about the fact that they've occurred in the past, but now we need to support students so that we can start to fill those gaps in any way possible. When we're talking about implementing curriculum, I think it's really important to make sure that, first of all, we're using high-quality instructional materials and resources when we're implementing them, but then the next piece is getting kind of a landscape idea of what that looks like across the district. So, you know, we purchase materials, we provide support for teachers, teach them how to use them. But then after that, it's finding out what does that look like in each classroom? And do staff feel empowered to make those really critical teacher shifts that we know have to happen in instruction? And do they feel empowered to do that? Do they need support with that work? Because the materials are great and they're high quality, and we have a lot more guidance more recently with things like Ed Reports and Curate on what great materials are. And they're peer reviewed. It's not like it's coming from, those reviews come from teachers, which is where we want that to come from. But it goes beyond just the materials. It's what does that look like in practice? And do teachers feel empowered to make those shifts that they've been trained to do and to respond to student needs in the moment? So we need to get a sense of, is that happening? Who needs support? How can we make sure professional development addresses that? So those are really important as well. So overall, I'd say we need to look at our systems, make sure every student has access to on-grade level instruction, and then look at where is the landscape of our implementation of instructional materials and where do the supports need to be.
Ms. LeBlanc, can you please describe 3 indicators that you'll use to determine the degree to which you're being successful in this role?
Sure. The first indicator to me is what's student achievement looking like? Are we seeing increased student achievement? The state measures that using our achievement scores through MCAS, but I think there's also other achievement pieces that are critical to look at too. Internally, looking at your grade 9 course passing to find out are students engaged in the courses that they're taking and likely to graduate. That's a big critical piece for us. I think there are multiple measures that we need to be looking at. How many of our students are engaging in advanced coursework? How many of our younger students are making strides towards grade level in their reading and math using some of our internal assessments? Those are big areas where we can say, clearly we can measure. Where are we seeing improvement? A second area is finding out, is utilizing our professional development and the data from our professional development to find out if teachers are feeling supported and prepared to do the work that's needed. So I think getting a sense about where they're feeling things are at in professional development. Are they getting the support that's needed? Are they getting time to do the collaboration necessary? Those type of indicators are going to be really critical. The third is the community piece. And I think it's really important to find out from the community if they feel connected to the school, if they feel connected to the work that we're doing and the vision and mission that we're moving forward. So that data comes more from surveys, more from sitting down, developing a task force to sit down with community stakeholders and parents and make sure that they are feeling connected to the district. And I think one of the key pieces there is it's easy to take in data from folks, sending out surveys, looking it over. The hard part is the second part of that communication, which is making sure we're communicating back out what we're learning and saying, okay, these were some of the pieces that we found out from surveying and from talking to everyone. And these are the action steps we're going to put forth to make the necessary changes to make sure that we are connected to our community.
Thank you.
How have you built lines of communication with the various district stakeholders, such as your leadership team, faculty, community leaders, and businesses?
Absolutely. So I think the number one thing is making sure that communication is transparent, and that builds trust. So the more that you can openly explain what's happening or why we're moving forward with something or why there's something that has risen to the top of an agenda, for example, the more people are going to buy in and keep open the lines of two-way communication. So that is something that I believe in across the board. I think it's really important to make sure, especially as a leader starting out in a district, to make sure that you're sitting down with all the stakeholders, taking the time to get to know them, to talk to them, find out what their concerns are, and then taking action on concerns, hearing out where people are at. I think it's important to reach out to local businesses, especially with the work that you're moving forward on between innovation pathways, thinking about internships and other opportunities for our students. It's critical to make connections with businesses, sit down, find out what they're looking for, and see if there are ways that we can work together to build a direct line to build up programming. Examples like perhaps being able to build a partnership for interns, but perhaps a business does have someone that can come in and do some presentations for students as well. But we only get that by sitting down with them and actually getting to know where they're at and finding out what they're looking for. I think it's really important to build up communication with parents, make sure that they feel heard, respected in the school, and make sure that they feel that things are consistent across the board. One of the big things that came up just in the site visit was that it felt very disconnected from building to building, and that things weren't quite consistent. And I thought that was really interesting in an area that I would want to address fairly quickly, because that's feedback we can act on easily. Start looking at how systems look from one level to another. But making sure we're taking that feedback and actually taking action is really critical.
Back to me. So I have a two-part question for you. The first part is, how would you foster meaningful, productive, and supportive relationships between staff, families, and students?
So I would start out by making sure that I take the time just right from the beginning getting to know people. I think it's important to be at the table with your staff. I think it's important to be at family events. I think it's important to be available in the community so that you have the opportunity to hear what's going on and to find out where people are thrilled with and proud of the things going on in Webster, which it was really wonderful to hear many of those through the first visit, but also where people have concerns. And I think by being present, you're an available ear. I have learned that in my work at Gateway, that the more that you're around and available, the more you start to hear about and more people tend to talk with you, which is really helpful. But to continue building that, we have to build trust, which means when we do receive feedback, we have to take it, consider where that's coming from, and find out, for instance, one of the pieces in Gateway was that our families don't have a lot of access to a lot of different services. So as a district, we've made a commitment through our work to really bring services into the school building so that students and families have access to them. We have a health center right inside of our building because that's a need. There isn't a lot of access in those towns to that. So we built upon what needs were. Another big thing that came forth was there's not a lot of available childcare in our district. So as a district, part of my work this year has been writing for grants so that we can extend our childcare options, for instance, wraparound through grade 6. So we have service and care for that. So I think when when families, when parents provide that feedback and they say, these are the things that we need, then it's taking the action on it and saying, okay, here's how we've moved forward. These are some of the things that we've brought in. So those are other ways that we can. And then we continue to build up trust between staff, parents, students, by continuing open communication and being really transparent in what we do.
So to piggyback off that, what are the supports that you will develop and implement to make families an equal and informed partner with staff?
So I think there's some built-in things that naturally happen. We use our student information system. That's a way that grades get out, but that's one-way communication. And it's really important to make sure we're fostering a two-way street with that. So I think it's important to have family events at the school where the school becomes the heart of the community, whether it be a family math night, whether it's a family literacy night. But events like that are really helpful to building up that communication and bringing parents into what we do. One key piece that, being someone who operates our title funds and does that kind of work, we know that when we do an evening like that, when we want to bring people in, we have to have something for young kids to do. And we have to have food available because when you're asking people to come in the evening, they need a way to make dinner. They need a way to have dinner. So, making sure that the events are actually thinking about the needs of families so that we can engage them and bring them more in and have them working with us side by side. I think it's important to make sure that we are, again, listening to all that feedback that they provide, acting upon it. And then I also think it's important that our communication internally is respectful of parents and is thoughtful of where families are at and how things are going for them. So that's something that is a constant working thing for all of us.
What concrete steps would you take to bring us out of turnaround status? And how will you measure and report on the progress to stakeholders?
Absolutely. So as a district, you have already taken many steps, one of them being purchasing high-quality instructional materials, making sure that those are available in math and ELA across grade levels. That's one key piece, making sure that there are those rigorous grade level texts and things for students to dig into, which is absolutely wonderful. But then the next piece is, what does that look like day to day? Is it in use all the time? Are people confident using it? Do they feel good using those materials? Where do we need support? So concrete step number one, get a landscape layout of what things are looking like. Where is that implementation at? Are people comfortable and confident? Are we seeing materials being used in classrooms? And that requires being in classrooms. That requires taking the time to meet with teacher stakeholder groups. It requires a lot of work, but it's really worthy and important work. From there, the second step is to take a look and go, okay, now that we know where things are at, what supports do we need to do instructionally? Because we know we've got the materials, but now it's really what steps do we need to make within the classroom? And what steps do we need to make in our intervention structures? So do we have a structure right now where students have access to the necessary interventions that they need in order to be able to further access their grade level curriculum? Do we have enough staffing doing that work? Do we have enough materials for intervention? Once you have that tier one instruction, that classroom instruction, now we have to look at how are we supporting students when we do find gaps. So I would be looking at what does that look like, and systemically, is it supplemental, or are we unintentionally supplanting in places because schedules are tricky and it's not a very long day instructionally, so it is hard to make all that fit. So that's where I would be sitting down with the leadership team, looking at the schedules, looking at our internal structures and saying, okay, how do we make sure every kid is getting what they need, and how can we build that in? The third piece is looking at is kind of looking at engagement as a whole. Are our students coming to school? What are the reasons that they are or are not? What is working for them? And that can be anything from looking at our discipline data, that can be looking at our grade 9 course passing, because we know that's a strong indicator of if students are going to graduate. We can be looking at lots of different pieces, but we want to know, are they coming in, are they engaged, and what changes and shifts do we need to do to get them here and engaged? Because until they're here and engaged, it's really hard to do that achievement movement moving forward. So I think that's a really critical piece.
How would you ensure that the district is providing adequate instruction, support, and interventions to our students and members of subgroups who fail to meet the learning standards?
So I think that's a really important systems-based question. So my first question that I'm going to ask coming in is, does every student have access to the full grade level math instruction, ELA instruction, science instruction, social studies instruction, and then additional supports? Because very often when we start to see that there's gaps and they grow over time, you find out that unintentionally there's been supplanting of time somewhere in there where students have been pulled from that on grade level instruction. And when we have students who are not getting access to on grade level year after year, it's impossible for them to catch up. It's impossible for them to get to where they need to be. So then we have to look at creative ways to use our time, use our resources, whether it be having additional services outside of the school day, whether it's looking at our summer programming to avoid summer slide and to be able to address certain needs, whether it be looking at the internal structure of our school day and how that looks. Those are different pieces that we're going to have to take a look at and analyze. And that analysis is not necessarily top-down, but it's really shoulder-to-shoulder work with your building-based instructional leadership teams, finding out what does the structure do right now, where do we need to go from here. I think that it's really important. Pardon me for a second. I think it's really important to sit down with the whole team and really get a sense about what does a day look like for a student. When we think about a student who perhaps is struggling with their reading, what does their day look like? Are they spending a full literacy block and then getting additional supports that meet them where they are at? Or is it a small group that's kind of geared towards maybe close to where they're at, but not quite where they're at? What does that structure really look like? And taking it down, we can look at the data at a macro level, but sometimes going down to the micro level is of what does it look like for a student going through the day? And how does that address their needs is really important. So we're going to look at those different student structures and see, are we really addressing the needs? An ELL population, where are their services happening? Because realistically, we want to make sure some of their services are tied to literacy work. That's really important. So if they're not receiving some of their services tied to literacy work, that's an adjustment we need to talk about, and we need to make that. So I would want to be looking at the schedule across the district. But then I also want to look at the training for staff. Are they prepared to do the work that needs to happen? Do they need additional supports? What has their professional development looked like up till this point? If you're doing intensive literacy work, are you Orton Gillingham trained? Are you trained in foundations? Where is your training at, and what are you comfortable and confident with? One of the big areas of challenge is when you look at middle school literacy. There's not a lot of great literacy intervention training for middle school teachers yet. That's an area that DESE has identified that they're digging into more and more work in. So that's one of those, okay, we know that there are some materials out there. We know we need to engage in a lot more professional development with that. So that's one example of an area where we know professional development is going to be critical. But looking at how we do that work across the district is going to be really important. And then finally, as we're thinking about our groups, we need to be looking at data and student work. So what does an A-level piece of writing look like? And sitting with a group of teachers and looking at that and saying, what do we see? What do you notice? What do you wonder when you look at this writing? And really taking the time to dig in at that level gets you to think about, okay, this is the student work that I see. These are the things that I notice in there. These are the things that I wonder about. These are the shifts that I'm thinking I want to make. And that's how we start talking about making critical instructional shifts, is taking a dive into student work and student data, getting curious about it, sitting shoulder to shoulder and really diving in. That's how we can start to look at it on the level that we need to in order to make progress.
What is the role and value of assessment instruments in today's schools?
So I think the value of assessment is that it gives us baseline data to start working from. So we have a sense about where we are at. This is what we've got as far as where students are achieving right now. And knowing and understanding where we're at gives us a good idea of how to plan forward. One of my favorite reports that comes from MCAS is the item-by-item analysis that allows you to look and see which standards did not go particularly well in that assessment. So instead of looking at the individual student level, it looks at, from a teaching standpoint, these are the standards that didn't go particularly well this past year. What shifts can we make in a classroom that will impact our students, that will serve a large group of students well, and really push our instruction? And that's a really helpful way to look at that data, because as we know, MCAS data comes the next year. So if I'm a third grade teacher, when I get that data, I don't have that class in front of me anymore. They've moved on to fourth grade. So that item by item analysis that really looks at the different pieces allows us to think about our instruction and think about, okay, so if the students really struggled with finding the main idea last year, how can I incorporate new tasks and do different things in order to make sure that we're taking care of that this year? And I think that data piece really gets us thinking about our practice and really digs in that way. So I think when data is used from assessment to really dig into our teaching practice and look at how we instruct, that's really helpful and useful. And it does help us to get to compare progress, but I also really appreciate some of we currently use iReady. I know that tool is used here as well. And that gives us a sense about where students are performing, but it also gives some projected growth, and embedded within that assessment, you actually can see what the next steps in instruction are for students on an individual level. And that's really helpful to kind of plan more individually for students and get a sense about what needs to happen next. How can I intentionally group students? And this is the kind of work that I'm excited to dig into with groups of staff and with our building leadership, because this is where we can make really meaningful progress and work together to really improve student achievement.
Back to me. Could you please describe your ability to cultivate a disciplined and safe school environment?
Absolutely. So I'm a big believer in setting expectations, and those expectations really need to be culturally responsive, and they need to come from our community at large. They should come from our stakeholder groups at large. It shouldn't just be a few people setting expectations, but rather we should be getting the information about what people expect in their safe and supportive school environment. Because it's not necessarily the same for everyone, but we need to be thoughtful and respectful and culturally responsive in that way. Once you have those expectations, it's the part that always has to happen is that you instruct on those expectations, we model those expectations, we collect data about how students are meeting those expectations, and then we reteach it again, right? We reteach it every time that the data shows us that that needs to happen. When you set the expectations, you model them, you go through that process, you take the data, you see, okay, so the hallways, the data was okay. We look in the classroom, data was great. So that tells me this month we're going to focus on hallway expectations. We're going to reteach them. We're modeling it. We're going to have students perhaps even create some posters, do things like that for the hallways, just to refresh us about what our expectations are. But we set those expectations. We keep revisiting them. We reteach them. We model them. We do that work. At the district level, it's important that we have policies that then support what happens when expectations aren't met. So we have to make sure our discipline policy is regularly up to date. We have to make sure that our handbook and our code of conduct is where it needs to be. And that it's responsive to what our needs are. And that's a constant ongoing piece that has to be re-looked at regularly. And when it's not, you start to see some interest. One of the districts that I worked in, I looked through the code of conduct, and there were things in there that I was like, I don't think I've seen a student do that in 10 years. So you know that we need to be constantly updating it and really looking at it and saying, does this make sense? And is it in line with the current laws and expectations that we're held to? Beyond that, then we have to talk about what happens when things aren't clear, the investigation process. So when something happens and there are expectations not met, often it leads to needing to investigate. So we need to make sure that building leadership is comfortable and confident to do that investigating. And there is a learning curve to it. It's hard work, and we need to make sure we're supporting building leaders to be confident in that work. And teachers need to feel that both the building leaders are confident in it, but also that they are a part of that as well, that they understand the process. So we need to make sure that we're prepared to do that work and engage in it. From there, once we've gotten through how do the policies work, how does investigation work, then we have to make sure that it's regularly in practice and that we're communicating it out. Does everybody know where bullying report forms are? Does everybody know how to fill them out? Because the only way we're going to make sure that everyone feels safe is knowing that they know the process. They know where the resources are. They know how to do it, and they know they have support if they need it. Those are really critical pieces for people to feel comfortable and confident in our learning environment. And then we have to make sure that there's support. So it can't just be consequence-based. We still have to be teaching those expectations. And sometimes that comes at a much more one-to-one level for students who consistently are finding themselves needing additional support. So what do we have in place? What systems do we have in place to ensure that we have that level of support for students who need it? Because to just consequence and not have the support piece, it's not going to change. So we have to make sure that we have a thoughtful way to reteach expectations at the level that meets students where they're at. So that's my experience with it. I'm a huge proponent of positive behavior interventions and supports. And I think it's really important to note that there are some great resources for school culture work, whether it be the MTSS academies through the state, which one of them is the SEL Academy, which the state actually sends you to a ton of professional development and provides that at their cost, not the district's cost, to be able to implement things like PBIS in your district. There's also the Safe and Supportive Schools grant, which has a self-assessment process where you go through and you look at the indicators for your school and say, okay, where are we with all of these pieces? And that self-assessment is really helpful to both get a sense about where your district is, but also in the action planning phase, because there's grant money both attached to the self-assessment process and to then implement your action plan. So that's another great opportunity to dig into that work and utilize resources that are out there to really engage in what's important work.
How would you use student performance data to prioritize the use of resources, including money, technology, resources, and human capital?
So I think it's important to make sure as we're budgeting, as we're thinking about our different systems that include schedules, that addresses time, that we really look at what are our student needs. And we can see that through our data, not just achievement data, but you want to look at your discipline data, get a sense about where that is falling. How many of our students are missing multiple days a year due to discipline? How many of our students are chronically absent from school? And are there particular groups of students that are chronically absent more frequently? So we're going to want to look at all that data, break it down, and get a sense about, okay, how are we moving forward? What are we going to do? So I think it's really important to look at your data across all those different areas. And then, can I ask for a repeat at the end of that question? Because I just got myself tongue-tied. Thank you. Mhm. Thank you. So thinking about that and thinking about all of the resources we have to offer, when we look at that, do we need to put more time and energy into making sure students are attending school? Do we need to be putting more time and energy into looking at our schedules and our structures to ensure that every student has access to rigorous instruction across the board? I think it's important to take the data, look at it as a leadership team, prioritize different positions, different time aspects, different resources, whether it be things offered by the state, whether it be the different academies that there are offered, but deciding what is most important. And I think the data really helps you to identify, okay, these are our top 3 priorities. It typically makes it fairly clear. So when you sit down and do a data analysis, there's usually some key points that rise to the top. And that's where you then have to say, okay, so if we're saying that students' access to on-grade level instruction is the most important thing right now, and looking at our data, that's likely going to be one of them, then we have to make sure that we are using interventionists appropriately and that we have enough of them that we can, in fact, ensure students have access to grade level instruction and then can get supplemental support in literacy, in math, in whatever area they might need. And I think the data gives us that kind of clear direction of these are the places that we need to do the work. From there, though, it's the hard conversations. It's sitting shoulder to shoulder with the leadership team and hopefully also getting information from your building-based instructional leadership teams to find out what's working and what's not. So we know that this is a priority, but do we have what we really need? Do we have the time in the schedule to do what we need to do? Do we have the right number of staff to engage in the work? What is it that we need additionally? Is it that we need more funds allocated for something? Do we need different physical resources? What is it that we need to do? So I really feel strongly that the data kind of helps set that tone, but then it's sitting down and collaborating and finding out what's actually going on in each building and where people are feeling that we don't have enough things allocated. I know one example is counselors right now. School counselors are critical at this time, and they have been for a very long time. They've been a crucial part of the work that we have to do. I don't think I've met a school counselor that would tell you that they have enough school counselors because they are constantly in demand and they're doing a ton. So then we need to look and say, okay, one piece of data I would want to know is, does every student that is hoping to see a counselor get to see one within a reasonable span of time? How do they access that? And how can we find out if students are getting what they need? So I think that's another way that we can utilize data to really determine, are we allocating our resources appropriately?
Describe your philosophy surrounding the evaluation of direct reports and how you would mentor, guide, and support underperforming staff and inspire others to perform at a higher than current level.
Absolutely. So The process of evaluation is really, one of the things I appreciate about the Massachusetts model for educators and for administrators is that it opens up fabulous conversations. When you look at the different elements on the rubric, they really are a great starting off point to really open up awesome conversations about your practice. For instance, when you look at the curriculum planning and assessment one, there's questions about there's one element in particular that talks about how do we share what we find with students, which really makes you think, okay, when do I share out what I've found with my students? When do I sit down and talk to them about, okay, so we did this assessment and here's what I learned from looking at your work? So I think a lot of the elements open up fabulous conversations. And I think that's the really critical part, is setting aside the time and the energy to do thorough evaluations and to really have those conversations. And that's part of what builds trust so that we can engage in the work. When you sit down and you set goals with an educator, with a building leader, with whoever you might be sitting down with, but it's really important to have those open conversations about different indicators and places that you'd like them to focus, and then have them work to set a goal. So when you're working side by side on that goal setting, now it's kind of got co-ownership, and it allows them to say, these are the supports I'm gonna need. So now I have a clear sense about, as the instructional leader of the district, what are you gonna need from me in order to be able to be successful at this? And they have a clear picture of what I'm expecting from them. So I think goal setting is really important in that process. And then it's being in there and working with them closely and having conversations each time that you get the opportunity to work with them for a stretch. You know, how do you think this is going? Can you show me data that supports what you're thinking? Those conversations are rich, and they're really helpful to finding out where support is needed and where a more directive approach is needed. I think it's important to be really supportive, but it's also important to be direct about what you're looking for and what you need. We know that achievement needs to be addressed as a district, so it's going to be important to be really direct. We need to see subgroups improving. We need to see, as a whole, literacy improving. We need to see math improving. These are things we know that have to happen. So putting that right out there is also important, and transparency should be there. People should know what you're looking for, and that goal setting time is a time for things to become really transparent. It's important to be actively involved with building leaders, with anyone that you're supervising, making sure you're having conversations, making sure you're observing, making sure you're working side by side with them. And then the formative evaluation piece comes, and that's where you sit down and you say, okay, so far I've seen this, and this is what I'm going to need to see over the next several months. Again, that transparency, that directness, these are the pieces I need to see. It should not be a surprise to anyone. That is not the purpose of evaluation, and being direct and honest is critical. And then you go through the rest of the process and provide feedback consistently throughout. I think for me and my own growth throughout my career, it's been so helpful to get consistent feedback. And in the times that I've gotten consistent feedback, I've also felt the most respected. So I learned from that, and I've brought that forward to when I'm working with my colleagues and when I'm working with people that are direct reports. I appreciate feedback consistently. I appreciate direct conversation. I appreciate honesty and transparency. So that's what I bring forward in the work, and I think that's the best way to go about it. That said, I think it's also really important to be excited about this work. What better purpose could there be than improving things for students? So I bring that enthusiasm to everything that I do. I think it's really critical work, and I'm excited to be engaged in it. So that is a huge help. I know I've explained over time some of the different things that I've done in my current district. And one of the big pieces is just being enthusiastic about what we do, whether it was implementing a new ELA curriculum the year after we had just implemented a new math curriculum. People got on board because they knew that they would have a voice, and they knew that I was enthusiastic and passionate about the work, and I knew they were, and that makes it great. That makes things move forward, and it's really important.
Let you catch your breath.
Thank you.
How would you address the turnover at the building administrator level?
It's a good question. So being a building leader is a really difficult job, and I think I think it's really important to make sure, first and foremost, that they are supported, whether it be the training that's needed for them to do the work that they need to do, be it understanding how to do a Title IX investigation, be it understanding how to file 51As and the requirements around that. All those different pieces are really important. And so anytime there's a new administrator, we have to make sure that we're training them in all the things that they need to do. The second piece is making sure that you're supporting them to build community. Are they connected to the school? Do they feel like they are part of it? Have they been part of setting the expectations? Have they gotten the chance to really work with their staff and dig in? And I think it's important as the instructional leader of the district to take the time to set up, what does that look like? And how can I support you? Because my job is to stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder with you and support you in that work so that you feel connected to your school and so that your staff knows that you're there for them and that you're prepared to do the work. So I think it's really important that training is there, but also the support to help them build community. So that starts at the top with a strong vision, a strategic plan. This is how it's going to look, and everyone being unified under that vision so that we're all moving in the same direction together with the support of our building level staff who are in the trenches doing the work every day, the support of your building-based leadership and the leadership team at the district level, all moving forward in the same direction. And that allows us to feel more like a community that's going towards a purpose. So I think that's a really critical piece. And then the other piece for them is making sure that they have the support that they need within the building, whether it's resources, time, whatever it is that they might need to be able to be confident in doing their jobs. Because if they're constantly saying, I don't have enough of this or I need more of this, they're going to get frustrated. And we need to work towards making sure they have the resources that they need in order to do a great job moving forward. So I think that's a really important thing to address as well.
Who are you accountable to, and how will you hold yourself and others accountable for follow-through and outcomes?
So first and foremost, I say this because it's who I am. I'm accountable to my own standards for myself, first and foremost, because I hold a very high expectation of myself. I think it's really important that everything that I do is focused on students and what they need and addressing their needs. I am accountable, of course, to the school committee, as they are my evaluators, and I am accountable to the community because I am there representing them. So I am accountable in that field as well. I'm accountable to my building-based leadership teams because unless I am doing everything that I need to do to get rid of any obstacles for them to do their job, if they're not succeeding, that's also a reflection of my work. So I need to be making sure that I'm removing obstacles so they can do that. I'm accountable to the families because they send us their very best. They send us their kids. They send us their very best. And we need to be doing our very best to make sure that they are getting everything that they need. I am accountable to the students. Students deserve the best possible education that they can get. And it's my job to make sure that that's happening and make sure that we are fulfilling that promise. So I feel like I'm accountable across the board. And I started with myself because I do set an extremely high standard for myself, but I don't think that I'm the most important on that list. I do know that I am a tough critic of myself. That being said, I think it's important that because I'm accountable to all of those groups, I also need to be available to all those groups so that I can hear what it is that they're looking for and what they want to see. I believe I left out staff, so let me go back to there. I'm accountable to staff because if I'm not providing the resources, the time, the professional development that they need, then they aren't going to be able to get the job done for kids. So all these groups are who I'm accountable to. I'm going to say that and try not to say that's a lot of pressure. But it's the best kind of pressure because we have such an awesome opportunity here to really build Webster up. There's so many great things on the horizon. The amount of energy about the work that's ahead was incredible on the site visit. I can't say enough about how dedicated the teachers are, how excited they are to engage and see improvement. So they are really enthusiastic, and you have the best possible opportunity right now for that kind of growth.
Ms. LeBlanc, we're nearing the end of our time here this evening. And in closing, I just would like to ask you if there's anything that you were hoping to have the chance to talk about this evening that we haven't gotten to yet.
So I am very curious because one of the things that came up throughout the site visit was this sense of there's kind of a disconnect between levels. Is the committee hoping to see a much more unified across the district experience in Webster where families can feel that consistency? Is that something that we're looking for, or is that feedback that you've also heard?
I would say yes, that is feedback that we've heard. And also sort of a unification between central office and each individual building and then the buildings, among each other as well. Yes.
One piece that I would love to know more about, because throughout the site visit, I met with lots of stakeholder groups. The one group I did not get a chance to meet with was students. I would be very curious, what are students looking for in an instructional leader for the district? What is the feedback that they've provided in different ways about the direction they would like to see Webster schools head in?
Well, I'm not a student. And it's been a long time since I've been a student.
Fair enough.
But we have a student rep that visits our school committee meetings regularly, and they bring a real honest perspective on the student experience. And what I've learned from that feedback is student voice and being able to have an impact on whether it's things like lunches or dress code or events, sports, all of those types of things, program of studies, all of that, I think are things that, we hear most from our high school students. They're most able to advocate for themselves. So those are some themes that I've heard from our student reps over the years. Anyone else want to add anything there?
It's my understanding that we are currently going to be putting out a survey to students about what they think about the curriculum. So we'll be getting thoughts about what they think about what they're learning.
Anything else on your mind?
So many things. Is the district continuing, is the plan for the district to continue on and expanding innovation pathways and opportunities for students to engage in internships and other career training track work, even through the renovation, but also is that kind of a key part of the renovation process and concept?
So I can speak to that a little bit. I'm on the building committee, and I have spoken also, amongst the students about innovation pathways, and they do love it. I know Michelle Bigelow is working really hard to bring in more programs. She's constantly looking to improve and see, what other internships are out there. So ultimately, yes. And the second part of that is we are bringing that renovation piece of the pathways into the building. So we are working on that as well. That's part of the project.
All right. I won't keep going.
No, that's okay. We're here for you. This is your time too. So anything else lingering or anything that you were hoping to tell us about that we didn't ask you about?
So I've talked a good amount about curriculum work and about that piece. One key piece that I think I haven't gotten to spend a lot of time on in this process is the work that I've done around grant work in my current district and kind of the process and the purpose for that. So so that the committee knows, I came into my current role as the director of curriculum having zero understanding of grants, baseline zero of understanding of what I was doing. And so I'm a quick learner and became very capable of it very quickly. I do seek out a lot of resources to learn and to grow in my practice, and I think that that's a really key piece in any position that you take on. But that said, what I found out was there's a lot of opportunities out there, and I've become pretty competitive with grant writing, and I'm very proud of what we've done as a district with grant money, but I think it's been a great opportunity to really see, what's out there, how we can use that as a district to really leverage the work we need to do, because no matter what, there's always this kind of push and pull in budgeting with the town, or towns in my current case, where it's hard to ask for more because then they're put in the position of having to cut back other things that also impact our families, impact our students, and not in a good way. So being able to leverage and do that work through grants has been a really wonderful experience for me. And I've really loved thinking about, getting to dream a little, right? What would happen if we could actually have after-school care for students that went through 5 o'clock at night and we could get some tutoring in for kids, right? It's a pretty big dream. We got to do that, and we saw improvement in it. And that's the kind of dream work that I really love to dig into and find new resources for. And that's exciting work to me. So I hope to bring that enthusiasm for that kind of work and that a little bit outside of the box thinking to your district. And please know that I am up for the challenge. I do dig in, and I do love to learn new things.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure hearing from you this evening. So we have some difficult work ahead of us, but we thank you for your continued interest.
And thank you so much for all of your time. And I know the search process is hard, and I know that you've been in it for a while, and I really appreciate you bringing me back and taking the time to talk to me tonight. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Good night.
You too.
Okay. She wanted to stick around and that you're making a decision tonight. So, committee, here is where you start making decisions. For the record, Alicia Mallon, I'm here from the MASC. I'm covering for Tracy this evening. You can make a decision tonight. Here are your options. You can open a discussion, complete the discussion, and vote. You can decide not to open the discussion at all and adjourn until tomorrow. Or you can open the discussion, share your opinions, and even get so far as a straw poll, and then still also wait until tomorrow to take your final vote. So it is up to you, to the committee, what they feel like they would like to do tonight.
What is the desire of the committee?
Through the chair, I would like to have the opportunity for us at least potentially open this up to discussions and see if we can come to a decision. I think with all the information fresh in our minds, it might be in the best interest of doing that.
Okay, anyone else?
Agree. I would agree to that.
Okay.
Okay, so in your paperwork, Madam Chair, you have the motion that you're going to make to open the discussion. When you open the discussion, you can begin sharing your impressions. If you were on a site visit, if you have, I know the chair has the references, you can share your impressions, and then you can begin a discussion. After you share your impressions, you do need to decide what method of voting you're going to take. Are you going to start with a straw poll, or are you going to go straight to a vote? When you do the vote, in your packet, it says, there's the outline for the 2 different ways you can vote, which, let me make sure I get this right. So there's the ballot method, and then there's the motion method. So everyone can either go around and say a name, or someone can make a motion in favor of one. And prior to closing that vote, you can stop and ask if you have a majority, if you reach a majority in that vote, but it's not unanimous. You can stop, and as the chair, before you close the vote, you can ask if anyone wants to change their vote. And a lot of committees do like to do that if it looks like it's going in one direction, to create a unanimous decision as a unified committee. So that is something you would also need to decide at that point. As long as you don't close the vote, you can change your votes. Okay, so you can go ahead and make your motion to open the discussion.
No, all this will be happening in open session.
By law.
So I will entertain a motion to open the discussion regarding the superintendent finalists.
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. Lori, would you please pull the committee?
Yes.
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 Yes. So a few things I'd like to begin with is that each of us had the opportunity to do a district visit. So, and for those watching, our finalists visited the Webster School District, but members of the school committee from Webster visited the home district of each of the 4 finalists. So I would like to open it up for each of us to share our impressions, high-level impressions of those visits. Should we, and we can really start anywhere. Is there anyone that would like to open things up?
I will. So I had the pleasure of visiting Steve Lamarche on March 2nd. I was the only committee member that was able to meet that day. I spent the entire day at the Dudley Charlton District at Shepherd Hill. So it was really great. I met with 9 groups overall. The groups ran from students, local leaders, so town administrators, the chief of police in both towns, fire chiefs in both towns. I met with district office and administration, so all the central office people, the assistant superintendent, finance. I met with a group of parents, teachers, staff, principals, and I also had the ability to Zoom with Mr. Lamarche's prior district in Bourne. That was, it was just telling all of the people that came out to talk about him. I just wanted to touch on the student piece because I think the student piece was really important to me to start the day with the students. They were amazing, well-spoken. They were very happy that they have a superintendent that is visible. He's present. What I heard from them is he attends everything. It's not just the sporting events. He attends, everything from band to drama, everything. He, knew a lot of the students by name as we were walking around the school. But the students also shared with me that he started a leadership program. So Mr. Lamarche started a leadership program with the students, so it's any student that wants to be on it from 9 through 12. And they meet monthly, I think they said, but he's available to them whenever, and they just talk about anything and everything. They did talk about mental health awareness and how they wanted a little bit more information around that. So they were really forthcoming and good. I just wanted to kind of just share some of the feedback that I received from the groups. And these were, it was the same messaging that I heard over and over again from the groups. He's a working superintendent. He helps where needed. Somebody even pointed out that he mowed the lawn of a middle school because they needed it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. He's accessible to everybody. He's present, respectful, and kind. He incorporates solid procedures. He has created an environment of 2 towns, 1 community, which I thought was really important. He mentioned the 7 and 7 clocks. That's part of that. In Bourne, they noted that when he came to the district, there were 4 buildings operated each on their own. He came in and built a cohesive team with a common mindset, and he always puts the student first. So I wanted to share all of that perspective with everybody. But it was a good visit.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Blythe. Anyone else want to share out about a visit?
I can go next. So Ms. Siddiqui and I were able to meet Ms. Perangeli and different focus groups here in Webster. We met with a group at each school. We met with a group of community leaders, and then with the central office staff. My understanding is we were actually in a different scenario than maybe most other site visits because Ms. Perangeli didn't really pick these groups. She went to the 3 schools and put the focus groups in front of us. So these weren't hand-picked individuals that maybe she wanted and she trusts to have the discussion with. It was kind of an outlier. Maybe she didn't know what these answers were going to be. And I can say that it was all positive. There was maybe 1 or 2 individuals that had some reservations, but the vast majority of it was consistent, and it matched up to a lot of the qualities that were touched on during our interview last night. They touched on the fact that she has longevity here. She's been in the district for 23 years. She's really just grown in every position she's been in and learned on the job. She cares all about not just the community in general, but the staff, the families, and the students here. She's one of the biggest faces of the school. She's always at every event. She's in all the schools. She knows the students, teachers, families, and that she was one of the driving forces that really kept the schools going through the COVID shutdown. She's a listener. She learns. She's a natural leader. She's approachable. She has incredible respect through the entire infrastructure here. She goes beyond what has ever been asked of her. One of the things that stood out to me is at all 3 schools, it wasn't just the teachers that went out of their way to convey how much respect they had for her, but it was the custodial staff, it was the cafeteria staff, that they saw her, she was there. If they ever need help, you know, when the pipe burst in the middle school, she was there in the morning cleaning up the fallen ceiling. She's gone and put out lunches for kids. She's done the crosswalk duty. One of the things that they pushed on was she knows the district. She knows where we're heading and what's worked and what's not worked, so there won't be a period of time of transition and trying to get a data collection. She's been in all the meetings and knows all the aspects of the school. You know, everyone just said it's weird because you don't really pick up on it, but when they go back and look at it, she's just always in the meetings. We touched upon whether anyone was going to have any reservations really that she lacks classroom experience. I think it's the elephant in the room, maybe for that candidate. Everyone but 1 teacher raised that they would have no issues with that. They think that she's shown that she's able to learn a lot. She's taken different PDs that have come available for her to get that background to grow upon. The town staff loved her to the point that they were hoping that we would leave her in her position because they didn't want to lose that ability to deal with her because she's been the go-to for them. In the central office, we touched upon whether they thought she'd have difficulty making tough decisions, especially with that group because they're her peers at this point, and she's been around them. And it was unanimous that she's always been tough but compassionate. She's shown over the years that she can have those tough conversations with people. Whether or not there is a personal relationship there, she's done it, they've all seen it. But they just wanted to say that they think she would build that missing community relations portion that maybe is missing right now because she's so involved in the community as a whole.
Thanks, Mr. Adamopoulos. I'm just going to piggyback on that report out since I was with you. I think you did a really great job of summarizing things, so I won't repeat. Some of the words that were themes during those visits were admirable, respectful and respected, knowledgeable, credibility, follow-up or follow-through, fair, ethical, and really, I guess, yeah, I heard from every school that she was sort of the face of the district at this point. And, you know, going off of the library situation during COVID, every school said that she was in the building at every school, either making sure we got lunches together or handing out Chromebooks for kids or getting them ready on the weekend to make sure that kids had what they needed. And it sounded like, to me, there was a clear feeling that the students are the central concern for her, and they're the driving force behind all that she does. The theme was really that people feel like they can count on her, and that they see her as a unifier. And I heard, I think, pretty clearly that people are looking for some unification. Would you agree that was the
I would
theme?
definitely agree with that, especially across all three schools.
Yep, agreed. Just looking to see if there's anything else here in my notes. I guess just a strong advocate would be the only other thing that I would add to this. Bring a level of respect. So that concludes my report out, I think, for,
I'll go.
okay, great, thanks.
I'll talk about my visit to Huntington to visit Deanna LeBlanc's district. So I met with students, central administration, teachers at all levels, other administrations such as special education, technology, elementary school principal, and the superintendent. And there were a lot of themes throughout all of the focus groups. And one of the biggest themes was what Deanna just spoke about regarding the grant writing. I mean, even students acknowledging the work she's done in that area to the tune of $2 million, which is very impressive. And it's only a small part of what her job title is, a very small part, and she puts in countless hours to make sure that they're getting everything they can to support the students. Another theme throughout was her ability to research and provide, not necessarily herself provide, but make available professional development to all staff and allow it to be individualized to what staff need, because there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. She's reached out, and there's a regional component to the professional development that's offered to districts there. And she just checks in frequently. Another theme was how much of a go-getter she is. She's visible, she's available to everybody at all of the levels, and she's able to have the difficult conversations with staff when she needs to. That was one of my questions regarding when there's pushback, how does she respond to that? And she talked about how staff talked about how she is able to collaborate and listen and make changes just by providing that support. She's involved in a lot of programs that we're familiar with, such as MTSS, PBIS, response intervention, special education, L services. And when I met with the student group, they talked about how it's evident that she focuses on equity and inclusion for all students. And I think she touched upon that a bit tonight. When I met with one of the administrators, she shared with me that Deanna has actually trained administrators on how to do evaluations using a growth mindset, and that she's really worked with the building-based leaders to improve their practices so that they're doing meaningful evaluations. And that's sometimes where those difficult conversations come in, but she is able to do that effectively. When I asked some of the focus groups, like 5 years from now, what will Webster be saying if we hire Deanna? And two separate groups or participants in groups said, thank God. And a student said, she will 100% turn the district around.
Great, thank you, Ms. Navarrete. I also had the pleasure of visiting Goddard School in Worcester with Ms. Millett. That was the visit for Carrie Allen. And some things that stood out for me there were, and by the way, I should mention that we met with a variety of stakeholders across the very large school district in Worcester. And some of the themes included her ability to diffuse difficult situations, whether it be with parents or students, and her ability to really understand people and demonstrate that understanding. She makes her presence known, but she's also willing to listen. And they added, even when she has the end result in mind, she's able to listen and hear people out and help them get there. Never in her office. She's always around the building. They need to call her on her walkie-talkie or on her cell phone to find her. Her communication is described as clear and consistent, that it may not be everyone's preferred style, but she is always acting in the best interests of students when she's interacting with people. Her evaluations are clear, supported by facts, and not a surprise for people. She's demanding, has high expectations of herself and others, but they're not unrealistic. Overall, amazing ability to connect with teachers, highly regarded. Let's see here, what else, Ms. Miller, anything else I missed here? There's a lot.
You know, her staff stays. That
Yep.
was a huge question that we asked about retaining staff. And her staff stays. And I had a quote that they called her the ultimate mentor.
Right.
And families feel very comfortable to come into the school and ask for help because she gets very involved with the community around her. And she has helped families understand the curriculum by having explanations of testing and so forth. I had a tour of the building, and every student we met in the hall said stop to say something with her and make a connection. She seems very, very respected by both her staff and parents. And her staff has hung in. They were in pretty rough shape at the beginning when she came in. And they did the work with her because they knew she was going to do the work too.
Yeah.
And she advocates for her staff and students.
Yeah, and you reminded me, Ms. Millett, it sounds like when Dr. Allen arrived at that school, it was in rough shape, not only academically, but physical plant-wise as well. And she was instrumental in bringing new life into that building, sounds like quite literally. And even the room that we were in for our visit had been, I think, used as storage or something, and she had beautified it and was seen, on the weekends painting and doing landscaping and whatever it took so that the students in that school would feel a sense of pride walking into the building. I thought that was remarkable as well. Any other report outs regarding district visits? Sounds like they were very positive. I also have references that I can report out at high level. So Dr. Allen, again, unsurprisingly, very organized. That was another thing that we actually heard in our district visit as well. Brought a high degree of order to any school that she oversaw. Strong interpersonal skills, and her interpersonal skills were a perfect match for the discipline that she needs to deploy when needed. She knows how to relax and recreate out of doors, and has a great sense of humor. Really great colleague. And let's see here, great personality. Had previously led 2 high-performing schools, but was reassigned at the request of the superintendent to head a K-6 school that was in low-level status and move it into non-sanctioned status, which she did. Regarding Mr. Lamarche, any questions or comments about that, by the way, before I move on? No? So regarding Mr. Lamarche, people saying that he makes all of us better, has an open door policy with the school committee, encouraged outreach, not only with him, but with the admin team, maintains professionalism, has a lot of patience. Let's see here, skilled manager, understands work-life balance well, very reasonable in demands, open in what can be expected of him. And then regarding Ms. LeBlanc, consistent and sustained focus on students, Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention knowledge for pre-K through 12, extensive grant writing experience. Teachers are able to select the math curriculum based on state standards. She's a self-starter, useful for what she may not know yet. She's a very quick study, does whatever amount of learning she needs to come up to speed on something. Comfortable with dealing with DESE, would reach out to them as needed. Was important part of adopting new curriculum, gathering teams of teachers, getting momentum going, inspiring and energizing teachers. She's a go-getter, going to dedicate herself to be the best superintendent she wants to be. And for Ms. Perangeli, incredible leadership qualities, wants to build consensus, listening to varying points of view, solid strategic plan. Can't say enough about her, enough good things about her. We'll discuss town issues with her. So this particular person was a town person that said they'll even go to her for accounting or budgeting issues to get her perspective, and has very strong managerial qualities. It's important to note that the reference process began late in this process, and we did not get all references from all of the candidates. Ms. Perangeli being one that we got fewer references on, which I'm less concerned about in one sense, knowing that we all know her and could potentially reference some of her strengths and growth areas and that type of thing, but just want to point that out because I think that what I shared out for her references were a little briefer than some of the others. That's what I have with regard to references.
So at this point, you can continue your discussion, or if you'd like, you can straw poll to see if you're heading in a consensus direction. If you choose to straw poll, what a lot of committees usually choose to do is they'll go down the line and everyone will say their top 2 that they're leaning towards. And that can at least start helping you narrow it down a little bit. So if that's, you can either keep discussing or you can move on to a straw poll if you'd like.
I would recommend that we move into a straw poll. That may be the most efficient method so that we can identify if there is consensus or not before moving forward.
Sure.
Is that okay with the committee? You ready? Okay.
My top 2 would be Ms. Perangeli and Dr. Allen.
What's that?
Can I pass?
You want to go last?
Yeah.
Okay. My top 2 would be,
No, it's not a motion. Oh, his second, okay.
she didn't say yet. Nick said Monique Perangeli and Dr. Allen. And I'm going to say the same, Ms. Perangeli and Dr. Allen.
Please,
You're
I
fine.
need a minute.
Oh, yes.
Linda, if you want to.
At this time, I would say my top 2 are Dr. Allen and Deanna LeBlanc.
I have to say, this is very tough because
is.
we have
amazing.
How lucky, how lucky.
4
are we?
very good candidates.
Yeah.
We
Agreed.
really, truly do.
Yes.
And
Really hard.
I'm going to say, but my mind can be swayed. Steve Lamarche and Monique Perriangeli.
Oh, God, that leaves me, huh?
Yeah.
I am going to say Monique Perangeli and Steve Lamarche.
So, given your straw poll, your top two candidates as a committee appear to be Perangeli and Allen. 4 members mentioned Perangeli, 3 members mentioned Allen. LeBlanc 1, Lamarche 2. So it seems like you're leaning towards Perangeli and Allen. So at this point, you can continue discussing, or you can table the discussion and move to adjourn to reconvene tomorrow to choose. It's up to you. If you feel like a discussion further would be fruitful, you can keep going. If you feel like everyone wants to let it sit for a little while, you can do that too. It is up to you.
Yeah, I might be in a minority, but I would like to just continue and try to hash this out as a group if we possibly can.
I agree. I'm in the same mindset.
Go ahead and continue your discussion. Very often people will speak to their first choice and why they think they would be a good choice. So if you want to start doing that, you can go right ahead.
Before we do that, I'm just going to ask the committee. We have 4 people who said Mrs. Perangeli. We have 3 people that said Dr. Allen. Is there any desire to deal only with those 2, or is there a desire to continue to discuss the other 2 candidates?
I would like to include Steve Lamarche.
My desire to talk through them all. I
Okay.
think if we all have feelings of more than, 1 or 2, I think that that's in fairness, but know what the rest of the committee feels.
That's okay.
Okay.
So important to note here too, when you get to an actual vote, if you do an actual vote tonight, according to your policy BEDF voting method, you only need a majority vote. And you can do that one of 2 ways. You can do a ballot vote where everyone will go down the line and say their number 1 choice, and then you would tally that, and you only need a majority vote. You could also do a motion in favor of just one, and before you start that vote, you need to make it very clear which one of those methods you're going to use. But according to your policy, you only need a majority vote.
So I will open it up to the committee for discussion regarding any candidate you'd like to discuss first.
I'll go first again.
Okay.
So I guess I'll talk about Ms. Perangeli. I think she's here in an atypical manner, maybe compared to the other finalists. While maybe she doesn't have the same in-school experience or credentials, I think talking to the staff yesterday was really illuminating, that it got mentioned more than once that people looking for a good boss, and they leave their jobs if they don't have a good boss rather than the environment they're in. And that she has demonstrated that she would be a very strong and good boss. And that was consistent, I think, through all 3 schools. The fact that they all really didn't have any issue with the fact that she didn't have that in-school experience, that she's just gone out of her way to pick up PDs and to be inside the meetings, whether it's a glean meeting or a leadership meeting, handling the budget. It was said over and over again that she knows everything. And she's gonna surround herself with a team that can cover up the areas that maybe she's not as strong in while she learns that area. But that she's always gone out and she's not afraid to say, I don't have that answer for you right now. Let me go research it, and she brings the support back to what her finding was. She knows the community. One of the feedbacks we got was that she has pride for the entire school system. She went through the school system when Bartlett was the place to go. She has now seen where it is, and she's going to strive to bring us back to that situation where the communities around us want to send their kids here, and the people in Webster want to send their kids to this school. So I think that walking over those meetings where I thought there may be more curiosity about whether, or fear that maybe she doesn't have that strong background, wasn't something I ever got the feel of at all. And it was more so she's demonstrated her leadership ability, and she knows how to put the supports around her to handle any sort of deficiencies until she gets strong there. And we're not going to lose a year or a year and a half going through data collection for a new superintendent to have to come in here and then say, okay, these are the changes we need to meet. She already knows the data. She's seen what's not worked. She's already been the face of central office in these 3 schools, where I think the administrative and leadership staff feel very comfortable working with her. And it's not going to be a feeling out process with her, that we can really just start going day one, and start implementing the changes we need to make that maybe we haven't been doing over the last few years to get this going, especially since COVID happened.
Thank you, Mr. Adamopoulos.
All right, I'll go next. And, I will say that one of the reasons that Mrs. Perangeli didn't make it into my top 2 is because I know that Dr. Allen and Ms. LeBlanc are kind of in those shoes right now in the school level and have been their entire careers. That was definitely evident on my visit to Huntington. Like, she was right there doing the PDs alongside with teachers, learning all of the materials, all of the instruction, and even to the point where she runs intervention groups at her schools. So I think there is something to be said for that classroom, school building level leadership, and for our principals to be working for somebody or really with somebody that has walked in their shoes could be very meaningful when it comes to implementing the curriculum, implementing interventions, scheduling, and supervision and evaluation. So, that's really why I had voted for Ms. LeBlanc and Dr. Allen. I think Dr. Allen is my higher choice. I think it's unique that we have a principal that is coming to us from a turnaround situation. And hopefully, if she were selected, then she would be able to share all of her experiences for the last 6 years with this district, again, at that school level.
Thank you, Ms. Navarrete. Looks like we're going down the line here. I guess I'll begin. I've been gathering my thoughts here, but I'll begin with Mrs. Perangeli. And just to reiterate what Mr. Adamopoulos said about a learning curve for someone who's entering the district. Now, certainly there will be a learning curve for anyone entering into this role. And while we're removing the learning curve of understanding the district, we would have a learning curve of the curriculum and instruction and that type of thing. And nothing can replicate actually having been a teacher and been in the classroom. However, I think that, to quote one of the very eloquent teachers that we spoke with during our visit to Webster, public education is a business. While we are not manufacturing widgets, we are creating educated adults. And in order to do that, there is something to be said for operating a public school district as a business. And that's something that Mrs. Perangeli has demonstrated an ability to do. in her role as business manager. And it was clear to me during the course of her interview process and our focus groups that she has been listening very carefully during her 23 years here in this district, whether when she started out as a parent volunteer in the classroom, as a substitute teacher, and many other things along the way. And her story that she shared with us kind of mirrors a lot of the kids in our district, where she lived in a single-parent household and got herself to school, not always successfully, as she put it. And I think that there's an opportunity for either students or other members of the community to see themselves in her and see possibility and, you know, have faith, I suppose, in the possibilities that are here for all of us. And I felt very strongly that I needed to share a lot of that, especially based on the feedback that we got from staff, which we would be remiss if we didn't go back to the very high level of support that we heard from staff, and that it was staff that I was surprised to hear were not actually picked by her, that when the focus groups were developed, that trust was placed in the building principals to create a focus group and invite them to represent the school, all different stations of role within the school. And when the time came for the district visit, she just put it back to the principals and said, if it's possible to get the same folks that were part of the focus groups back, school committee wants to come out and meet with people, and that's who we got. So, and regarding Dr. Allen, you know, to reiterate some of what Ms. Naparata said, you know, the turnaround work is really remarkable. She's respected, she's affable, and you know, shows a good sense of humor, but also a good boundary of where that works and where it needs to stop, and really seems to be able to engage with people and relate to people in a meaningful way and bring order and structure. So those are my initial thoughts.
I would like to start with Monique and be perfectly honest. I was one of those people that questioned the curriculum part until I was at her meet and greet. I went to all the meet and greets for all 4 candidates, and I came out of there so impressed by what she said. I totally turned around. For example, she said we shouldn't be doing, or principals shouldn't be doing, coming up with quick PDs for their staff. She said, we know the strategies we have to work on. There is no reason why we can't do this, come up with a PD plan for the year before school even starts. And then we have an idea of where we're going. And she's been listening, and she's been part of things in the central office, and it's quite obvious, not just business related. And she's all about the kids. When she says that, her face just brightens up. It does. And she does, between what she has learned in central office and what she hears at committee meetings. She's at all our committee meetings. The other thing that struck me was listening. A goal is to listen to the staff and the teachers and what's going on in the classrooms, and to be visible and be in the schools. I was very, very impressed by that. On the other hand, we have Mr. Lamarche, who has some experience and does have a connection to the town. That's what makes it difficult. But I did a turnaround from listening to Monique. And I was very, very comfortable after hearing these things that yes, I would put this in her hands, not worrying about curriculum. She's got it. Or if not, she's going to get it.
So I just wanted to share, the 4 candidates are remarkable. It's really, really hard, and that's, they all bring such great qualities. To Ms. Millett's point, Mr. Lamarche has great experience. He's well respected. He's what's really important to me is that the community feels comfortable, right? And everybody's in that community. It's not just students, it's parents, it's teachers, all of staff, our town leaders, and just really our town. And you look around and, just hearing the students talk about Mr. Lamarche, they love him, respect him, love that he's visible and at everything. He's a strong mentor. Some people even said to me, don't take him, so it was a great visit. I was able to, see different facets of him that that don't always come out in an interview. But to also just piggyback on, what most of the committee has said about Ms. Perangeli, she's present at everything, in everything. She cares about this community in a way that, we see it in our teachers, and it reflects, from the top. I feel like she's extremely relatable to everybody in the community. I think back to when we were trying to get the community to understand the building project, right? And and Ms. Perangeli was up there, and she just was poised, confident but humble, and just was able to relate to everybody in the room, whether they agreed with her point of view or not. She's poised, well-spoken. And the curriculum piece to me came into play a little bit, but I quickly dismissed it because the way I look at it, the district is a business, and there are a lot of businesses run by COOs and CEOs that have never been in the shoes, very successful businesses. And I think Ms. Perangeli could bring that to this district.
Any other comments? Would we like to do, is anyone feeling like their votes may have changed and they want to do another straw poll?
Or what's the ballot look like? Or does somebody want to make a motion?
So your straw poll results were 4 for Perangeli, 3 for Allen, 1 for LeBlanc, 2 for Lamarche. So when if you decide to do an actual vote, you'll determine, do you want to do a ballot vote or do you want to do a motion vote? That's for you to determine and declare.
The ballot vote.
Yep. Correct. And the motion wording is in the little packet.
I think we should do a motion.
Motion to appoint somebody?
I would make a motion based upon, without knowing the language, nominate Monique Perangeli as the next superintendent. I'm not on.
You gotta do it again.
Wait, do you want the wording?
I would love the wording, so I don't look like I messed up again. Thank you. Page 3. I move that Monique Perangeli be appointed as superintendent of the schools for Webster, subject to the successful negotiation of a contract of employment mutually agreeable to the candidate and the school committee and signed by both parties or their designees.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Lori, would you please poll the committee?
Yes.
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 Congratulations, committee. Now you can stop and ask if anyone wants to change their vote.
Does anyone want to change their vote?
No.
No.
Okay, then you can announce the result.
So the result is that we have made a successful motion to appoint Monique Perangeli as the next superintendent in Webster, pending successful negotiation of a contract of employment that's mutually agreeable to the candidate in Webster Public Schools and signed by both parties or their designees. So we're going to motion, I'll entertain a motion to recess so that I can contact Mrs. Perangeli.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Lori, would you please poll the committee? Adamopoulos and Blythe is a motion to recess.
Yes, I was the moving party. That's correct. Yes.
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 Yes. We'll be in recess for a few moments. Hello, everyone. We're back, and I'm pleased to announce that Mrs. Perangeli has accepted the position of superintendent here in Webster. With that being said, we will need to move into executive session according to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to conduct contract negotiations with non-union personnel, and we will reconvene in open session. I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Lori, would you please poll the committee?
Yes.
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 Yes. Good evening once again. We have recessed from or adjourned from our executive session, and we're back in regular session. And at this point, we are at the point where we need to appoint a school committee member to negotiate a contract with the new superintendent of schools.
I would make a motion to appoint Chairwoman Siddiqui to enter negotiations with Monique Perangeli on behalf of the Webster Public Schools.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Lori, would you please poll the committee?
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Lori, would you please poll the committee?
Yes.
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 Yes, meeting adjourned. Good night, everyone.